3 hours of One Piece theories. If you've clicked on this video, it's probably because you really like One Piece and need something to have in the background while you're doing other things, like working out, cooking, driving, or even playing it while you fall asleep. If that's the case, I wish you sweet dreams. I'd also love it if you could leave a comment telling me what you're doing while watching the video, since I really enjoy reading them. Of course, making this type of video takes a lot of work, so I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. They've also added a new feature to hype up videos, so if you click that, it would help me a lot. Alright, I'll stop talking now and leave you with over 3 hours of One Piece theories. The first thing to explain is that the world of One Piece seems to move in cycles and a predetermined destiny, something that Eiichiro Oda himself has hinted at many times in the series. In fact, the word destiny has appeared explicitly at completely key moments. An early example was when Luffy received his first bounty. Makino commented that Luffy was fulfilling his dream, and the mayor, Cubslap, wondered aloud if it was his dream or his destiny. This idea that Luffy's achievements might be predestined has been underlying since the very beginning of the story. It's no coincidence. Eiichiro Oda has left clues that in the world of One Piece, there is an inherited will that spans eras and certain events, almost as if it were the work of destiny. Another very revealing moment is the final speech of Whitebeard, Edward Newgate. Before dying, he tells Teach that he is not the one Roger was waiting for, hinting that there is someone designated to continue Roger's will. In that same statement, Whitebeard talks about how since ancient times, there are those who inherit the will and predicts that one day a person will come who will challenge the world and carry centuries of history on their shoulders. These words practically describe a kind of prophecy, suggesting that there is a destined path, a chosen one who will fulfill the task that even Roger could not complete in his time. Let's remember that Gall D. Roger himself, after finding Laugh Tale, commented laughing, "Joy boy, I wish I had been born in your era. We arrived too soon." This confirms that Roger realized he had arrived too early to fulfill that destined mission, passing the task to someone from the future, most likely our Luffy. Even characters like Shanks have been involved in this notion of destiny. Shanks himself, speaking with a former member of Roger's pirates, Scopper Gaban, referred to himself as the destined child or the destined man, implying that Shanks had a very special role to fulfill. This is very interesting because it fits with the idea that Shanks has acted behind the scenes to guide certain events, like recovering the Hito Hito model Nika fruit, which ended up in Luffy's hands, something that might not be a coincidence. And in summary, One Piece has shown us that destiny and the inheritance of will are central themes, from the will of D to prophecies like that of Fishman Island, which Madame Shirley predicted that Luffy will destroy Fishman Island, an act linked to the dawn that everyone is waiting for. Everything indicates that there is a course of history that must occur. My personal interpretation of all these clues is that the story of One Piece operates in a kind of vicious circle, with events repeating throughout the ages in a very similar way. In other words, there are cyclical patterns. There always emerges an individual with the will of the type of Joy Boy who challenges the tyrannical world order and the world government, attempting to bring a new era of freedom. And there is always a final confrontation between these forces. This would have occurred not only 800 years ago in the Void Century with the original Joy Boy against the ancestors of Emu, but perhaps repeatedly since then. Possibly every few generations, an heir to that will emerges, a DI with the spirit of freedom who tries to overthrow the tyrant of the time, but so far has always failed, restarting the cycle again. That is why the world government has been ruling for 800 years without being overthrown. After each failed attempt, they erase from history the evidence of that uprising so that the world forgets and the status quo continues. A perfect example of these deliberate historical gaps is the God Valley incident. It happened only 38 years ago, and yet it was literally erased from the map and the books as if it never happened. If the government made an entire island disappear from the records because of what happened there, what might they have done over the centuries with similar events? To understand how Oda might have been telling the end of One Piece for a long time, we must look at two great wars we have already seen in the series. The Battle of God Valley, which happened 38 years ago in the story, and the War of Marineford, which in the present occurred just a couple of years ago in Luffy's timeline, that is, 2 years ago. At first glance, they are different conflicts, but you will see that they hold very surprising parallels, and Oda has created an intentional reflection between God Valley and Marineford. And this is crucial because the great final war that is approaching will follow this same pattern, but on a much larger scale. Let's look point by point at the similarities between God Valley and Marineford because they are the key to deciphering what the final war will be like. The trigger for the conflict will be a kidnapping. Both clashes began because the bad side, the government or the navy, captured someone, triggering the reaction of the good side, the pirates. In God Valley, as revealed in the latest chapters, the kidnapped person was none other than Shaki, who before being the bartender of Sabaody and Rayleigh's partner, turned out to be a legendary pirate in her youth, and was revealed to have been the Empress of Amazon Lily decades ago and the most coveted woman of her time. Her kidnapping shocked the world at that time and attracted the attention of the most powerful pirates. In Marineford, on the other hand, the kidnapped person who was sentenced to public execution was Portgas D. Ace, the son of Roger and a commander of Whitebeard. Both situations set the machinery of war in motion. In God Valley, Roger's crew went to rescue Shaki, and in Marineford, Whitebeard's fleet went to rescue Ace. Oda is telling us that something similar will happen in the final war. Someone important will be captured, their life in danger, and this will cause all the factions of the world to converge for the decisive confrontation. Then we have a young Marine with a conscience who questions the morality of the battle. In Marineford, we saw Koby, a rookie Marine protected by Garp, suffer a crisis of conscience in the middle of the massacre. He even stood in front of Akainu, willing to stop the war. Fed up with the senseless slaughter, well, in God Valley, there was apparently an equivalent role, none other than Monkey D. Dragon, yes, Luffy's father. He was there as a young Marine under Garp's command. Recent chapters confirmed a fan theory. Dragon served in the Navy in his youth. It is suspected that what he witnessed in God Valley, the cruelty of the world nobles, and perhaps the injustice of having to protect them, horrified him to the point of deserting. Dragon questioned everything the Marines represented that very day, which explains why years later he founded the Revolutionary Army. It is a very powerful parallel. Both Koby at Marineford and Dragon at God Valley represent justice within the Marines. Those who see the error of protecting evil, the Celestials or corrupt politicians, and they rebel. Perhaps in the final war, we will see that this archetype is no longer needed, because many Marines will awaken to the truth, or because the final conflict will be so clear, the true face of the government will be exposed, that there will be no doubt about what is right. In any case, it's interesting to note how Oda placed Dragon in God Valley in the same way he placed Koby in Marineford. Then we have the point that someone tries to prevent a certain pirate from going to war. In Marineford, Shanks intercepted Kaido before he reached the battlefield. Let's remember that Kaido, upon learning of the imminent war, wanted to take advantage of the chaos to attack Whitebeard, or simply cause a commotion. Shanks literally blocked his way, off-screen, obviously, and even with a duel against Kaido in between, he managed to reach Marineford in time to end the war. In God Valley, there was a similar incident. According to what has been revealed in the chapters, Captain Rock's D. Zebek had a confrontation with the Giant King Harold. And yes, until I get used to Rocks, I will keep calling him Rocks. I know his name is Davy D. Zebek, but it will be hard for me to change his name. It seems that Rocks was trying to recruit Harold for his cause, and Harold opposed him. A tremendous battle between Rocks and the Giant Harold. And this giant Harold was sent by the world government to intercept Rocks, making a clear parallel with Kaido and Shanks, where a very powerful pirate goes to war, and there is another who must stop him from going. Only that in the case of Harold and Rocks, we know that it finally did happen. This role of preventing reinforcements could also be repeated in the final war. One possibility is that someone, perhaps an admiral like Fujitora, might try to prevent a certain secondary pirate group from joining the battle. I think, for example, of the Cross Guild of Buggy, Crocodile, and Mihawk. They might want to join the chaos for their own agenda, and the Navy will send someone to stop them on the way. Can you imagine Fujitora intercepting Mihawk and company? It would be an interesting clash before the Great War, with Fujitora perhaps doing it by orders, but doubting deep down. It's just speculation, but it fits well in the pattern of God Valley, of Harold against Rox and Marineford, of Shanks against Kaido. Somehow there would be attempts to sabotage the meeting of certain contenders, although in the end, practically everyone would end up involved. Then we would have the sides of the war, and again we can draw a certain parallel with God Valley. As for Roger's crew, it would obviously be the Straw Hats, who this time would be reinforced with none other than the great Mugiwara fleet to show that they are stronger, and also providing a strong argument to win, while still drawing a parallel with the person who obviously carries the same will that Luffy carries. Roger's pirates are a mirror, a parallel to the Straw Hats, meaning that the comparison between them is very evident and they will represent Roger's side in this final war. Then on the opposite side, in God Valley, we would have the Rox Pirates, the most feared crew at the time, making the God Valley incident even more dangerous and more famous among those who know about it. In Marineford, although the main villain was the Navy for executing Ace, we also had Marshal D. Teach, Blackbeard, in the mix. Yes, I will continue to call him Marshal D. Teach, even though his name is Davy D. Teach and his new crew bursting in at the end to take advantage of the chaos. In fact, Blackbeard arrived at Marineford with destructive intentions. He killed Whitebeard and stole his Gura Gura fruit and began to sink Marineford with earthquakes. He himself declared his intention to destroy the entire island using Whitebeard's power. This is a direct parallel with God Valley, as it is known that God Valley ended up destroyed and literally sunk beneath the waves after the battle. Marineford almost met the same fate at the hands of Teach, if not for Shanks arriving in time to stop the madness. Teach chose to retreat upon seeing Shanks. Logical. It's chilling to think that Oda was about to show us another God Valley in the present. Marineford would have disappeared from the map as well, sunk into the sea. If the war had continued a few more minutes, who knows what would have happened? Even Teach himself hinted at it with much sarcasm. This detail connects both events and makes it clear that Marineford was a modern and smaller scale reflection. From God Valley, then we have the legendary figures putting an end to the battle. At Marineford, Shanks, with his mere presence, declares the war over. If anyone still wants to fight, let them come against us. And neither side dared to prolong the conflict after Shanks' arrival. His weight as a Yonko balanced the battle in that final moment. In God Valley, we know that the official victors were Garp and Roger together, but we also know that Figurlin Garlin was involved, who was a holy knight present on the island. This is interesting because now we know that Shanks and Garling are directly connected. Shanks is Garling's son and was born in God Valley, being rescued as a baby by Roger. We could say that Shanks and Garling represent opposite sides of the same coin. Garling served the government in God Valley, and Shanks became a pirate. One initiated the massacre of God Valley, triggering the tournament on that island, and the other stopped the massacre at Marineford. It's a game of generational parallels. I wouldn't be surprised if in the final war Shanks plays a key role again, perhaps facing his father or his twin brother, Figureland Shamrock, which would drive us all crazy. Just imagine the scene, Shanks against Shamrock, twin brothers separated by fate, each on a different side. It would be the perfect rhyme to what happened decades ago with Garling and God Valley. Of course, with Oda, you never know. He might kill Shanks before that war to give us an emotional blow. We know Blackbeard has unfinished business with him. Even so, to date, Shanks has always appeared to balance the wars, and this dynamic could repeat itself. After reviewing all this, it is clear that Oda deliberately mirrored God Valley and Marineford. In fact, Marineford was called the War of the Strongest, a title very similar to how we might imagine God Valley was described in the annals of history. It is no coincidence. Oda was not only showing a great climax in the middle of the series, but also giving us a preview of the scale and structure of the final war. He himself hinted at it in interviews. He commented that the final saga will make the Marineford War look cute or small in comparison, and these statements probably sound familiar because at the time it was said that Marineford would look cute next to the war because of the Wano War. Well, this was a translation error that many people interpreted as they wanted, but Oda was referring all along to the final war. And indeed, something huge is coming. If Marineford was an appetizer, the final war will be the full banquet. We can infer that just as Marineford seemed small compared to God Valley in terms of danger, let's remember that practically all the legends were at God Valley. Roger, Garp, Rayleigh, a young Whitebeard, Big Mom, a young Kaido, Shaki, some Gorosei around, the God's Knights, even Dragon, Baby Shanks, Teach. The final war would eclipse Marineford because even more powerful people will gather in one place, with much higher stakes. Let's not forget that after Marineford, Luffy rang the Ox Bell and married Jawaz 16 times, symbolically marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. It was a prelude to the dawn that is about to come. The true fight for the Dawn, the one that will decide the fate of the world, is destined to occur soon in the story. And speaking of destiny, chapter 1159 of the manga is titled The Island of Destiny, alluding to God Valley. Oda practically hints that God Valley was an island where destiny brought together great names for a transcendental event. Think about the incredible coincidence, or predestined coincidence, that on this island, Roger and all his crew, Garp and Marine units, Rox and his pirates with future Yonko included, Young Dragon, Garling and all the Divine Knights, some Gorosei, Shanks and Shamrock as babies. Half of the powerful world was in one place. That doesn't happen every day. It seemed almost written by destiny. And now, in the final saga, we are seeing a similar convergence of certain characters towards certain places. In Egghead, there were already quite a few powerful people. In Elbaf too, and even Imu, the king in the shadows, is aware of these cycles. In recent chapters, Imu ordered drastic measures against Elbaf, knowing that the next great war could be brewing there. In fact, Imu has personally gone to the front in Elbaf because he understands that the time for that confrontation has come. That is to say, Emu has lived through several repetitions over the centuries. Possibly he is immortal or of a long-lived race, or something that allows him to live a long time. And he recognized the signs that another war like the one at God Valley is approaching. Another destiny of Joy Boy against Emu, but this time, he senses it could be different. Just as Roger said, now the right moment might truly be arriving. Summarizing the lessons from God Valley and Marineford, we have a clear outline of how the final war will be in terms of its setup and the key pieces involved. Let's look at those elements one by one, and the candidates we have in the present for each role. Continuing with the parallel, the final war would start, as I said, with a kidnapping or capture that would shock the entire world and force all sides to act. Now then, who could be that captured person whose situation unleashes absolute chaos? This is a very difficult question, and I have thought a lot about it. For it to be the greatest war ever seen, the hostage must be someone whose fate matters to multiple factions, not just Luffy. Moreover, it must be such a serious event that even pirates who would not normally collaborate with each other or entire countries would mobilize. So let's evaluate some possibilities. The first, Monkey D. Luffy. If Luffy himself were captured by the world government, it would undoubtedly light a fuse. His allies and fleet would come, as well as his family, Dragon and Garp, but perhaps this situation might feel a bit anticlimactic. Luffy is usually the one who leads, not so much the one who needs rescuing, but as a call to the final war, it works very well in principle. But there's a small problem. Why, for example, would Teach's side show up if Luffy were imprisoned? We might think that Teach could go to eliminate him definitively, or to steal something from him, his devil fruit. But the truth is, it feels a bit strange, and I don't know how it would fit. Then, the character of Shanks could indeed go to protect his bet on the new era, Luffy, because he is his friend, but the character of Teach falls apart for me, and it's a very important side. Then we have the option of capturing Teach. His crew would obviously try to save him, but I doubt that heroes like Luffy would go to rescue Teach. Rather, at most, they might take the opportunity to fight him by force, but it's a bit strange. Besides, Teach would hardly let himself be captured alive at this point. It is more logical for him to be the instigator, not the victim. Another option is Boa Hancock, and many people thought of Boa as a parallel to Shaki. Both were empresses of Amazon Lily, and if Boa were captured by the Navy, let's remember that after the evolution of the Shichibukai, she was already in danger, and Teach even attacked her trying to steal her fruit. Luffy would surely go to rescue her. We already saw how important Boa is to him and his friend, and the debt he feels for her saving his crew. Teach might also be interested because he already tried to capture her once. He wanted the Mero Mero no Mi. However, Boa alone might not attract everyone. For example, would Shanks or the revolutionaries come just for Boa? Her capture would only matter to Luffy and Amazon Lily practically, maybe to Teach, but if he withdrew from Amazon Lily out of fear of Rayleigh, I don't see him being so obsessed as to get involved and risk everything in a great final war for her. Another option is Nico Robin. Robin is a constant target of the government. If the Gorosei or Imu manage to capture Robin, it would be very serious. She is the only one in principle who can read the Poneglyphs. Luffy would go to the ends of the earth to save Robin, as he already did in Enies Lobby. Dragon and the Revolutionary Army appreciate her. Dragon took her in for 2 years. He might have a huge interest in ensuring Robin does not fall into the hands of the world government. Teach might also need Robin to find Laugh Tale, I don't know. Even Shanks might understand the importance of protecting Robin for the sake of the truth of the Void Century. This is a quite strong possibility in terms of the storyline. One downside is that Oda already did an entire arc about saving Robin in Enies Lobby, and repeating it on a larger scale would be symmetrical, but perhaps repetitive, unless now the enemy is Imu or Teach, and the scale is global, of course. Other options are Sabo or Vivi. After the events at Mary Geoise, both Sabo and Vivi have been in danger. Sabo was falsely accused of killing Cobra and was almost captured, although he managed to escape from Mary Geoise with injuries. Vivi disappeared after the reverie, and we know that Imu showed special interest in her. If Imu captures Vivi, that would put Luffy, because of his promise to Cobra and his friendship with Vivi, into action. The revolutionaries too. Sabo and Vivi escaped together. Sabo might have protected her, and perhaps all of Alabasta clamoring for their princess. However, would Teach move for Vivi? Only if there were something to gain, maybe use her to blackmail for Pluton, since Pluton was related to Arabasta or something like that. Sabo in danger, on the other hand, would mobilize Dragon and the revolutionaries. Also Luffy, who is his brother, and even former comrades from the Revolutionary Army. Sabo was already the protagonist of the climax in Lulusia, survived an attack from Imu, and is very beloved by the public. A public execution of Sabo, the assassin of King Cobra, could be the government's move to discredit the revolutionaries and lure Dragon into a trap. Teach might try to steal Sabo's Mera Mera, but he already has enough fruits. Difficult. Another option is Monkey D. Dragon. This option resonates more and more in my mind. Dragon is the most wanted man in the world, leader of the Revolutionary Army. If the government or Teach manages to capture him, it would be the event of the century. Imagine the public execution of Dragon being announced in the plaza of Mary Geoise, in the style of Ace. Luffy would have a powerful personal reason to go. Although he hardly knows his father, it would be his chance to bridge that gap, and obviously he would want to save him because of blood ties and because he is Sabo's mentor, and Sabo and all the revolutionaries would do the impossible to free their leader. The whole world would be watching because Dragon is the symbol of rebellion against the government. His death would be a message of terror for the oppressed people, and his rescue a sign of hope. And Teach? Well, if my suspicions are correct, Teach could be the one orchestrating Dragon's capture. Something like this could happen. Dragon launches an assault on Mary Geoise, which might already be underway because we've seen someone attacking Mary Geoise. Imu and Teach might face off at some critical moment, two villains clashing over different interests, and Teach, with his cunning, could defeat Imu and even steal his fruit, for example, if Imu possesses a mythical fruit like Abyss or some power. And in the midst of that chaos, Teach could capture Dragon, bruised after the battle, and present his capture as a trophy to win over the rest of the government or to lure Luffy into his territory. I can even imagine Teach proposing a public execution of Dragon to show that he now holds the true power of the world government. That is, after having defeated Imu and taken the throne of the world, his introductory act would be having captured the most wanted man in the world, the leader of the Revolutionary Army, and demonstrating that with him, revolutions are over, that now he is the one in charge. It would be the perfect parallel. Teach assumes the role that the Navy had in Marineford, and Dragon assumes the role of Ace as the Condemned. Only this time, the Condemned is the greatest political enemy of the government. A moment like this would definitely make all roads lead to the final war, on that island of destiny, or wherever it may be. Surely it would be Mary Geoise, I suppose. Honestly, the capture of Dragon makes a lot of sense. He fulfills being someone of global importance. He personally connects with Luffy and Sabo, involves the revolutionaries, and therefore every oppressed country allied with them. And it could involve Teach if he positions himself as the new tyrant. Additionally, it would have a strong emotional weight with Luffy meeting his father in extreme circumstances, and also symbolic, the revolutionary leader being judged in the last Great War, a public execution like what happened with Roger that started the Great Pirate Era. Of course, obviously this is a theory, and Oda could surprise us with another victim or even multiple multiple simultaneous captures. I don't rule out that they might capture more than one person. The government could set up a bizarre final coliseum with several sentenced individuals. For example, Dragon, Sabo, and Vivi. Imagine, the more bait, the more participants they would attract. In God Valley, there was a tournament perversely organized by the Tenryubito, where Shaki was the prize. The evil of the world nobles reached the point of auctioning human lives in a deadly game. For the final war, it wouldn't be surprising if Imu or whoever is in charge attempts a similar spectacle. A broadcasted public execution, a trap to gather all the enemies in one place. In any case, the outbreak would start with a calculated or prophesied incident involving rescuing someone crucial. Once this catalyst occurs, what sides will we see form in the great final war? If God Valley and Marineford teach us anything, it's that there will be three main factions: the heroes, the revolutionary allied pirates, the villains, the world government and their equivalents, and a third chaotic party, an ambitious pirate with their own style, a Rocks or Blackbeard style. But this time, the lines might cross a little due to unexpected alliances. Let's take a look. The Straw Hats and allies. Roger's heir. This side is clear. Luffy and his crew would be the modern equivalent of Roger and his, that is, the role of the Dawn. However, unlike Roger, Luffy would not go with just 10 members. Luffy has a large fleet of allies, those who swore loyalty to him in Dressrosa, numbering in the thousands. This great Mugiwara fleet will surely gather for the final battle, fulfilling the promise to come when Luffy needs them. This reflects how the pirates in God Valley were strong, but relatively few, while Luffy will have a considerably greater force, because this time the Inherited will must win, and for that, they need more firepower than in previous cycles. We would see characters like Cavendish, Bartolomeo, Shai, Hadrudin, and all the giants all fighting under Luffy's flag. Possibly allied kingdoms would also join, like Dressrosa, Arabasta. If Vili is involved, the Mink tribe, samurais from Wano. It would be a multicolored liberation army led by Luffy. At Marineford, Luffy arrived with a small, heterogeneous group: Ivankov, Inazuma, Jinbei, Crocodile, and even some enemies cooperating. In the final war, that idea will multiply. Former enemies could become allies of convenience. Perhaps we will see Crocodile and Mihawk from Cross Guild fight against the government side by side with Luffy. It is possible, since the Cross Guild hates the government and wants to overthrow its power system. It would echo how Garp and Roger set aside enmities in God Valley for a greater good. The world government and the Knights of God, the traditional villains. The great antagonist is Imu and his entourage, the Gorosei and the Holy Knights. Imu is the equivalent of the evil king who was behind the scenes in past eras. 800 years ago, he was the one who defeated the original Joy Boy. In God Valley, Imu was also present through the Holy Knights. Now, Imu faces the threat of the D again, specifically from Luffy, and is taking desperate measures such as destroying kingdoms like Lulusia, deploying weapons like the Mother Flame, or moving the Divine Knights to Elbaf. We can expect the world government to present in the final war its most terrible weapons. The Gorosei themselves, the God Knights led by Garling and Shamrock, perhaps armies of pacifists or Seraphim if they still control them. However, here comes a variable: Teach. Because there is a very strong possibility that by the time the final war reaches its climax, the world government as such will no longer be commanded by Imu, but by Marshal D. Teach. And yes, again, I know he is called Davy D. Teach, but I don't care. It sounds crazy, but let's take it step by step. Teach has been consolidating power. Right now, he is a Yonko. He has two OP fruits, the Yami Yami and the Gura Gura, and he always desires more. He has always had an air of a final antagonist against Luffy. He's another with the initial D, heir to the will of rocks in a certain sense. Many fans speculate that Teach could take advantage of the imminent chaos to usurp the throne. Let's imagine that in the first phase of the war, Luffy and allies manage to expose and weaken Imu, maybe destroy some weapon or something like that. Let's imagine, as I said before, that when Dragon and Imu are about to face off, Teach takes advantage, defeats both, finishes off Imu, and is the one to start that final war. This time leading the world government, claiming the power of the empty throne for himself. He could even steal Imu's ability if it comes from a fruit. And we've seen that Imu seems to use a power called Abyss or Shadow Control to possess certain bodies. Blackbeard would become the new world sovereign, and this would be a tremendous twist, but it would fit his character. He wants the world for himself. Let's remember that Rock's D. Zebek, Teach's ideological mentor, aspired to be king of the world and challenge the Celestial Dragons. Let's remember that Rock stood before Imu and told him that besides being a fan of Davy Jones, he still couldn't harm him, but that he would return. Well, Teach inherited Zebek's will. Even his base is the former pirate island of Hachinosu, which belonged to Rocks. So Teach could succeed where Zebek failed, defeat Imu, and take his place. And there's a curious detail, one of Blackbeard's ships is called Saber of Xebec, and Blackbeard himself is obsessed with the dark history of the Void Century. He sought out Pudding to read the poneglyphs and knows things about the past. His fruit rarity seems very curious. If Teach takes control of the government or temporarily allies with them, many Marines might follow him. Think about Akainu, would he obey Teach? Maybe not. Akainu hates pirates, but be careful, because he is still a military man, and having overthrown the current head of the world government and placing himself at levels of power, he might simply consider it as a change of position and everything would remain the same. So, be very careful, because even though Akainu is the way he is, this time Teach would stop being a pirate to become the governor of the world government. In any case, it is possible that we will see a unified band of villains that includes Blackbeard and his crew, plus what remains of the world government. A Blackbeard, perhaps with authority over, for example, the God Knights, would be terrifying, since remember that if, for whatever reason, he takes Imu's fruit and gains its power, he could have control over the God Knights. Can you imagine Teach commanding Garling, Shamrock, and company as if they were his new generals? It could happen if he defeats Imu and steals his fruit. As for Blackbeard's crew itself, it is already parallel to Rock's. Interestingly, many have noticed similarities. Katarina Devon, the Moonhunter, is a cruel pirate who could be compared to Big Mom physically. Avalo Pizarro also has traits that could be very similar to Kaido, a kind of mirror effect between the two crews, and of course Teach corresponds to Xebec. They are not exact equivalents, but the idea of this worst generation or allied pirates in a single group does somewhat repeat. Teach's side would be the modern incarnation of the Rocks pirates, creating monumental chaos in their wake. Then we would have the Navy divided, justice versus blind loyalty. Within the naval force, a fracture also awaits. Just as in God Valley, there were Marines following orders protecting the nobles, the typical government soldiers, and a Garp who acted on his own justice. In the final war, there would be Marines who switched sides upon seeing the truth. We have already seen seeds of this. Smoker questioned things in Arabasta. Fujitora rebelled against the policy of covering up the slave trade in Dressrosa. Aokiji directly deserted. The good faction of the Marines would probably be led by Kobe, who is presented as the heir to Garp's just spirit. In fact, there is Sword, the secret unit where Drake, Kabi, Helmeppo, etc. are, whose purpose seems to be to act outside the corruption of the government. In the final battle, I imagine Kobe and perhaps old heroes like Smoker, Tashigi, joining Luffy to overthrow the tyrant. It would be poetic. Kobe at Marineford asked for the end of the war and was almost killed for it. And in the final war, Kobe could directly turn his fist against those who perpetuate injustice, completing the cycle of revolution within the Navy. Cycle that Dragon started in God Valley. On the other hand, there would also be Marines loyal to the established power. Akainu would surely stand firm trying to crush pirates and revolutionaries alike, regardless of whether the boss is Imu or the Gorosei or Teach. Characters like Rob Lucci from CP0 would also fight on the dark side until the end, loyal to oppression. This internal tension could lead to Marines fighting against their own during the war. A possible example could be seeing an Akainu versus Sabo, as we saw an ideological clash during the setback. Then we would have the Revolutionary Army, which would be allied with Luffy. It is almost certain that the revolutionaries would fight side by side with the Straw Hats. In God Valley, there was not yet a revolutionary army as such, since Dragon left there with the seed of that idea. Now, after 20 years of activity, the revolutionaries are a global force. Dragon is captured or killed before the war. His commanders, Ivankov, Belovetti, Lindbergh, Morley, Carasso, would take action under Sabo's leadership. In fact, Sabo is already seen as the Emperor of Flames and an inspiring figure after the false news that he killed Cobra and declared war. The death or capture of Dragon would put Sabo in command of the revolutionaries in battle, along with characters like Konkawala. They would provide strategy and coordination among the allied peoples. I wouldn't be surprised if we see the revolutionaries unite the armies of various oppressed kingdoms to rise against the government during the confusion. For example, affiliated countries suffering celestial taxes could rebel simultaneously. Imagine Dressrosa Province, Sakura declaring independence in support of the revolutionary movement. The final war would have multiple fronts, not just on one island, but global protests and uprisings. But the main front would undoubtedly have them fighting alongside Luffy. A dream battle would be Sabo and Luffy together against some admiral. Let's remember that Sabo already fought against Fujitora in Dressrosa, Luffy with Kizaru, but we have never seen them fight together side by side, and seriously. If Dragon survives until the war, obviously he himself would lead his army, but he would be the #1 target of the villains. In any case, the Revolutionary Pirate Alliance would be the embodiment of the liberating army of this era. Other unexpected allies would be these, and here we have characters like Shanks, if he is still alive at this point, Buggy's Cross Guild, and even Luffy's old enemies. And Shanks personally has his own objectives, but he has protected the status in a certain way. He is supposed to have spoken with the Gorosei to warn them about something. However, with his father Garling and his brother Shamrock on the enemy side, it is very likely that Shanks will intervene against them. It may be that Shanks arrives with his entire crew, Beckman, Lucky Rowe, Yasopp, and perhaps his role is to stop some threat, maybe face Teach before the Great War and sacrifice himself. I hope not, but it's possible that Shanks might die at the hands of Teach before the final phase, giving Luffy an even more personal motivation to finish off Teach. If Shanks survives for the final war, I imagine a scenario with Shanks leading the vanguard alongside Luffy, or protecting Luffy from some dirty trick by Teach or Imu amidst the chaos. The long-awaited Shanks versus Blackbeard could happen, finally unleashing their rivalry. Teach already gave Shanks the scar some time ago. Or, as I mentioned before, Shanks versus his brother Shamrock in a battle for the soul of the Figureland family. As for the Cross Guild, it deserves a mention, as Buggy made it clear that he dreams of finding the One Piece, even rallying Mihawk and Crocodile to rival Luffy, Shanks, and Teach. And he might see the final war as his chance to mistakenly proclaim himself a hero, or savior, or something like that. Mihawk in particular has loyalty only to himself. However, he hates the government since they pursued him after taking away his title of Shichibukai, and he is a friend, or at least respects Shanks. Crocodile holds a grudge against the government, was imprisoned, and also has an ambition for power, so it is not far-fetched that the Cross Guild might end up tactically allied with Luffy to overthrow the government and then perhaps fight over the spoils. It would be hilarious to see a Buggy pretending to lead an allied army in the middle of a war, with his banner offering bounties for marine heads. Also, if Admiral Fujitora appears, he could interact with the Cross Guild, since Izo is against the corrupt system. Maybe Fujitora pretends to fight them, but ends up joining their cause. Many strange alliances can arise in the final battle. As the common enemy, it will be imposing. Then we have the Giants of Elbaf, and there is a very important factor. Since Whole Cake, we were told that whoever has the Giants on their side will dominate the seas. The world government has been trying for centuries to enlist giants in their ranks. Vegapunk himself researched gigantification by their order. Imu himself apparently believes that having the giants on his side is key to winning the Great War. Currently, Luffy has good relations with Elbaf through Dory and Brogy, the giants from Little Garden who reappeared in Egghead, and also Shanks' alliance with the new generation of giants. It is expected that Elbaf will side with Luffy, as the giants value honor, friendship, and their relationship with the D. We have Jaguar D, Saul, who is also an Elbaf. There is an important detail in the recent chapters, and it is that Imu launched a devastating attack on Elbaf and directly confronted the giant warriors and even Scopper Gaba, who was there. This suggests that Elbaf could suffer significant casualties before the final war, perhaps to weaken its impact on the battle. Even so, surely the most important survivors could lead the giants to join Luffy. Imagine rows of giant warriors charging against the pacifists or against government ships. It would be spectacular. The giants can tip the balance. Perhaps they face some massive government weapon, for example, stopping an ancient giant on the opposing side or knocking down walls. Without a doubt, their presence would fulfill the prophecy. With giants on his side, Luffy would have a huge advantage. Then we have the ancient weapons, Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus, the most destructive trump cards in the world, and it makes sense to think they would have a role. Poseidon is Shirahoshi, the mermaid princess capable of commanding the giant sea kings. Pluton is a warship located beneath Wano, and Uranus is theorized to be the same weapon that Imu used to erase Lelouchia from the map. In the final war, we could very well see these weapons come into play. However, I have a hunch that their use will be early or limited. If one of the sides were to use the full potential of an ancestral weapon at full force, 100%, the battle would be short or unbalanced. For example, Poseidon could submerge entire fleets with an army of sea kings. Pluton could obliterate an island with a single cannon shot. And Uranus, let's not even mention it. We already saw what it did to Lelouchia, so to maintain the tension of individual fights and the epic nature of the characters, Oda might make these weapons cancel each other out or be destroyed before the decisive moment. We could have something like Blackbeard, who manages to seize Pluto, stealing it in Wano through someone telling him it's there. Let's remember that Caribou heard about Pluton and mentioned someone he had to inform, and now he's with Teach. With this Pluton, Teach would have a weapon capable of devastating islands, just his style. On the other hand, Luffy would have Poseidon or Shirahoshi as an ally. I imagine a scenario where before the start of the Great War, we have a Pluton versus Poseidon, and they engage in a kind of titanic duel. Teach could attack Sabaody or some area with Pluton, and Shirahoshi would summon the Sea Kings to stop him. In this fight, it is possible that both weapons will be neutralized, the ship in pieces, perhaps Shirahoshi injured or unable to call more creatures momentarily. That way, when the war on land is at its peak, neither could resort to a cannon shot that wipes everyone out in one go or the Sea Kings themselves. The fight must be decided the old-fashioned way. Hockey against hockey, fists, swords, and Akuma no Mi. Uranus, on the other hand, could be used by Imu or Teach for an initial devastating act, maybe destroying part of Elba or some rebel base or something like that. But be careful, because Vegapunk's consciousness is still out there and they might find a way to sabotage or neutralize it. There is also the possibility that Franky fulfills Thompson's dream by using the Pluton blueprints he memorized to build something that counters the original Pluton or Uranus. It would be great to see the Sunny modified with ancient technology. In any case, the ancient weapons will appear, yes, but Oda will be careful that they don't potentially steal all the spotlight from the heroes. They will rather be elements to add drama, for example. A shot from Pluton destroying something beloved that further motivates Luffy, or to force the alliance of factions, everyone against the weapon before continuing to fight each other. With all these players on the board, the final war of One Piece promises to be a monumental chaos, the climax of all the themes of the series. Freedom against oppression, inherited will versus fear, friendship versus hatred, destiny versus free will. Each key piece seems to be already placed or anticipated by Oda, as I have tried to explain. It is no coincidence that so many current elements repeat patterns of past events. Oda has been building this cyclical parallelism for a long time, so that when we are in the middle of the final war, fans can recognize and say, oh look, this is like Marineford but on a grander scale. Oh look, what's happening is what we couldn't fully see in God Valley. It would be a great rhyme of history. During this final war, we might see certain surprises or interesting details, and the truth of the Void Century, for example, could be revealed to the world. More than a surprise, it is a goal. Robin and the knowledge of the poneglyphs will surely come to light. Perhaps in the middle of the final battle, Imu or Teach might try to suppress the truth, and it will be crucial to protect Robin so she can spread it. I imagine a scene of Robin reading the Rio poneglyph and using a Denden Mushi to broadcast the message to the whole world and convey the true story of Joy Boy and the ancient kingdom under the government's tyranny. This would demoralize many Marines and ignite the revolutionary spark on every island. This could be the moral blow that collapses the regime, complementing Luffy's physical victory over Imu or Teach. Then we would have the D. And destiny. Surely we will finally know what the will of D means, the one shared by Luffy, Teach, Garp, Roger, Rox, etc. Many interpret it as dawn or destiny, which we have mentioned before, and it's that Whitebeard, upon dying, said, the legacy of the D will continue to wage war. It may be that we basically discover a formal prophecy about Joy Boy or Toki leaving a message about the year in which the Great War would occur. Let's remember that Toki jumped to the future and died predicting the arrival of the new dawn 20 years later. All these threads would come together. I wouldn't be surprised if Luffy, at some crucial moment, is literally the embodiment of destiny. For example, that the ancient spirits of will bearers, Roger Joy Boy, symbolically manifest behind him in the final fight. Something like saying, we are with you. Or maybe it's too much of a shonen cliche, but come on, Oda loves mythological drama. Then we have the sacrifice of a symbol. It could even be someone like the red-haired one. It could be anyone, but we might have someone who, for example, dies protecting Luffy from an attack by Teach, explaining the sacrifice of Ace at Marineford. But this time, as I say, with Shanks or Garp giving their life to stop even Akainu or Teach and save their grandson this time. Any of those deaths would further ignite Luffy's determination at the climax. Oda usually hits hard in those acts. He already did it with Ace, Yasuya, and Wano, so we can prepare for possible tears before victory. In short, the keys to the final war are already planted in the story. God Valley and Marineford gave us the structure, beginning with a kidnapping, defined sides, internal betrayals in the villain's side. Let's remember that Ochaku betrayed Rox by selling out Shaki. Squardo briefly betrayed Whitebeard by deceiving Akainu, surprising appearances that decide the course, Garp who suddenly appeared in God Valley, Shanks who appeared to stop the war, and an outcome that marks the entire change of the era. The final war will take all that and push it to the extreme. Oda has been playing with the concept of destiny in a very subtle way, so that in the end everything makes an impressive sense. When we see the Great War unfold, many will say this was already hinted at 500 chapters ago. It will be like fitting the last piece of a puzzle that is right in front of us. In conclusion, the theory of a cyclical destiny in One Piece, where events from the past are reflected in the future, is more relevant than ever. It's not that the story repeats exactly, but that there is a kind of cosmic script in the world, and it's the will of D. Always finds a bearer, darkness always has a face, and very soon Teach, and that the clash between them is inevitable until the cycle of oppression is broken. Oda has been preparing us for that decisive moment using historical parallels, God Valley against Marineford, and references to destiny in the words of characters. We know that this time is different. Joy Boy has returned. The table is set with all the pieces. The Poseidon weapon awakens, allies of all kinds, Imu revealed, and even the enemy senses it. The last Great War will be the climax where that destiny is finally fulfilled or broken. Personally, it excites me to think about how Oda could surprise us even knowing this general framework, because if there is something that characterizes One Piece, it is that, even though we know where we are going, Luffy will face the final villain and seek the One Piece, and how we get there always exceeds our expectations in creativity and excitement. Perhaps the final war will bring unexpected twists, like the appearance of the original Joy Boy in a flashback that inspires everyone in the present, or the liberation of thousands of slaves from Mary Geoise joining the revolt. Anything is possible. In any case, it is clear that Eiichiro Oda has woven his story like a great circle. Ancient events shape future events, and the concept of destiny gives the saga an aura almost of epic legend. We are approaching the moment when that destiny will fully manifest in the narrative, and if the clues do not deceive us, the final war of One Piece will be an event so colossal and so full of moments parallel to God Valley, it will blow our minds. As Oda said, Marineford will seem like just a tale or something cute compared to what's coming. Buckle up and enjoy the journey towards the dawn, because we are about to witness the culmination of this era of pirates, where, now indeed, the fate of the entire world will be decided, and this time, Luffy and his allies will manage to break the cycle. The vicious circle from 800 years ago will finally close, giving way to a new beginning full of freedom, the dawn that so many have awaited. We're going to talk about the Ancient Kingdom. We all somewhat understand what the Ancient Kingdom was. It was a very powerful, very ancient civilization that existed during the Void Century and had technological power that was incredible. Technology that is even far more advanced than things we have seen today. This was even mentioned by a person already ahead of us, like Dr. Vegapunk. And while it's true we don't have much information about the Ancient Kingdom, we have enough to know this. We also know that this Ancient Kingdom was destroyed during the Void Century, probably by the world government, and they were enemies of them. But Eiichiro Oda, the creator of One Piece, has made sure to give us information about this ancient kingdom drop by drop over more than 1,000 chapters, without making the most important parts clear. Then a theory arises that could completely change everything we know about One Piece and everything we believe. And the theory suggests that maybe we are wrong, as the perception of the fandom in general is that the world government has always been the bad side, and that the ancient kingdom was the good side, that they were the good ones, the ones who lost, and that those who won, well, they are the bad ones. So what if this is completely reversed? This is perhaps one of the craziest theories out there, but there are also arguments to consider this. The fact is that Oda, every time he has talked about the Ancient Kingdom, Joy Boy, or the world government, has made it clear that neither is good nor bad. He has not dared to commit, and a very clear case is when Vegapunk, who is telling us about the history he has discovered of the Ancient Kingdom, the Void Century, and everything, we see that he doesn't take sides and says he doesn't dare to say who is the good one or who is the bad one, and he simply tells us a part of the story, and Oda has done this throughout the whole work. The thing is that if it really is something like we think, it would be very easy to make it clear from the first moment, since it is something that all the fandom assumes. That is to say, it wouldn't be a very drastic change for the work if they confirmed it, as it would simply be an Okay, so we were right, but instead, Oda, as I said, has remained very distant from this, simply providing very little information and addressing other topics without mentioning if they are the good guys or the bad guys. So as I said, the theory says that the Ancient Kingdom would be the bad guys and that the world government would be the good guys, something that obviously, if true, would completely change the entire paradigm of the series. Now, does this make sense or is it just nonsense? Well, even though it may sound far-fetched, it could be something that makes sense, since the first argument used to justify this theory is precisely what I mentioned, and it's the little information that the author of One Piece has given from this kingdom, especially focusing on whether they were the good ones or the bad ones. We have it in our heads right now that the world government are the bad ones because we see them doing negative things, but it is also true that we are seeing it from one point of view, and perhaps they are doing it for a greater good, even though obviously their actions would not be justified, but we could understand why they do them. And Oda throughout the work has made sure to show us that there are neither good guys nor bad guys, since not even the pirates are the bad ones, using the Straw Hats as an example, or the Marines are the good ones, using as an example people like Akainu, who act in a very brutal way. And in fact, Doflamingo's famous speech about good and evil is something absolutely key, as he mentions that basically the people who win, the people who have power, the people who win the war are the ones who decide what is right and what is wrong. But one thing is what is decided, and another thing is what the reality is. Who is good? Who is bad? Being on one side makes you bad, being on the other side makes you good. Well, Oda has been playing with this for more than 1,000 chapters, so according to this theory, it could be that the Ancient Kingdom were the bad ones, the world government won, and now we are living a lie thinking that the world government are the bad ones. I know at first it might sound completely crazy, and I'm not saying I'm in favor of this theory, but it is true that I see certain arguments that could be very interesting if Oda decides to apply them and decide to expand them to provoke a plot. Twist. And let's be honest, if one morning you wake up, start reading the One Piece manga chapter, and it reveals that the Ancient Kingdom were the bad guys and that the world government won and they were the good guys, then it would completely blow your mind. You would be totally surprised, and it would be one of the biggest plot twists in One Piece. And you couldn't say anything to Oda because he has never clearly stated who is the good guy or who is the bad guy, as he has always played a lot with ambiguity, giving rise to this type of theory as well. So as a first theory, I think it's something that's certainly far-fetched, absolutely, but it's also something that could happen. And here, what I want is for you to leave in the comments right now whether you agree with this theory or not. If it had crossed your mind, if you have anything to argue for or against the theory, leave it in the comments. And now, let's move on to the second one. And with the second, we go to something that I think everyone at some point has theorized about things close to this. And it is something that Oda has shown us very clearly. It's something I vividly remember my reaction to when I read it. I remember being in the gym with a friend and reading the One Piece chapter between sets. And when I read it, I was just frozen for a minute or two. And my friend asked me what was going on. Then I had to explain the scene to him, and he, who hadn't watched One Piece, looked at me like, "You're crazy." Today, I have managed to get him up to date with the One Piece manga, and when he saw that, he felt the same as I did and said to me, "Now I understand you," and what I'm talking about is the Reverie arc. I'm specifically talking about the scene where we see Imu, who comes down with Luffy's bounty to a room. And we see that he opens a door and encounters a cold chamber, a frozen chamber. And we see that there's some sort of shelf, and on top there's a giant straw hat, just like Luffy's, frozen. And as a result of this, obviously many theories have emerged. But the one I'm going to present now is a theory that using this argument can suggest that, well, something very crazy could come out of it. The theory basically says that this is nothing more than a foreshadowing from Oda, making it clear that Joy Boy did not die and is frozen there. Yes, just as you hear it, Joy Boy did not die and is frozen there. I know that many people might say that this doesn't make sense, that there are several arguments that couldn't come out, and we would need to see how he is. And the first thing is that it is supposed that Luffy could not have the Nika fruit, since we assume that Joy Boy had that fruit. But the theory suggests that we do not have 100% knowledge of the devil fruits, and that we don't know exactly to what extent they can be used one way or another. That is to say, if a person is frozen to the point where they are really dead, the fruit could emerge, and then when thawed, that person, it wouldn't be dead, but rather, as I say, it would be cryogenically preserved. But the fruit would have already left their body, and it would be a way to extract it. Another thing that is also mentioned is that Joy Boy's will could not have been inherited by other people. And here it goes back to the same. According to the theory, since Joy Boy at that moment would technically be dead, but then would not die due to the same issue of being able to defrost him, then here they go into different variations saying other things about Joy Boy, since there are people saying that maybe the government will use him as a weapon, some saying he'll be used as a slave, some saying he won't have relevance. There are many variations here. I have to say that for me, the idea that Joy Boy is frozen, I don't completely dislike it, but I don't think he's alive. I believe that Joy Boy did indeed die during the Void Century, and I think at most we could see his hat, his head, something of his body as it is, frozen, and that they have something there, maybe his own bones, but some memory of that first Joy Boy might make sense that Imu has it frozen there in the chamber. But to my surprise, when I started looking for theories about the Void Century in One Piece, this is one of the most powerful ones I saw, and it surprised me, as there were many people think that Joy Boy did not die, that he is there frozen. But well, it's normal because this cold storage room, along with that giant hat, has brought 1,000 mysteries and 1,000 theories. And I want you to leave in the comments not only whether you think Joy Boy is alive or dead, but also your opinion and your comment on what you think about the giant hat, the freezing, and the whole chamber. What do you think about this? Leave it in the comments, and let's move on to the third theory. Let's move on to the third theory, focusing on one of the most important characters in One Piece to date, and also one of the least understood. We're going to talk about the character Imu. I think it's essential that if we discuss the Void Century, we have to mention Imu along the way. It makes perfect sense. And about Imu, as I say, there are many theories, many. And of course, not knowing anything, we could theorize about everything, as is the case with this character, but here they are going to go a bit further. They are going to try to specify it, and this theory aims to explain the entire meaning of Imu. their entire presence, their entire position in the world government, all the explanation they have, all their past and their connection, not only as I said with the Void Century, but with the Ancient Kingdom and the entire mystery of the world of One Piece, as the theory says that Emu is someone from the D clan. People whose secret we do not know today. We do not know what makes them special, but we see they have a D in their name. And today, we still have no idea of its meaning. But this theory goes a bit further. It not only mentions that Emu could be a D, which I have indeed seen several people comment on, but they say that Emu is a D who betrayed the Ancient Kingdom. The theory is basically that Emu was an inhabitant of the Ancient Kingdom, a person from the D clan. Like it could be Kurohige, like Jaguar D. Saul, or like the captain of the Straw Hats, Monkey D. Luffy. But that Emu at some point decided to betray the Ancient Kingdom. Why? For power, to take control of the world government, to create the world government, and to take control of the world, something that finally, over these 800 years, we have seen has gone well for him and he has achieved it. So this theory suggests that Emu could be the precursor of it all and could be the key to the start of the revolution, the start of the fall of the Ancient Kingdom, and the beginning of the rise of the world government. Does this make any sense? Well, if we analyze it coldly, I think it does. Oda has taken great care in everything he does with Emu. Carefully shows all his moves, tries not to show more than necessary, tries to teach just enough, and when he has to show something more, it's clear that he has measured it well and believes it's the right moment. Notice that to this day, we still don't know Emu's name, and to this day, we still don't know what happens to him. It is true that we have heard rumors within the work itself, but they are still just rumors. We don't know their face, we don't know their gender, and we have no idea what happens with this character. So, when we see a character that is so well crafted, and knowing that we are nearing the end of One Piece, and that one of the great mysteries we have is not only the entire Void Century, but the Ancient Kingdom, what happens with the D, what happens with Emu, seeing that this theory could connect several pieces at once and explain to us what the meaning of D is. From Emu, what happened with the Ancient Kingdom from Emu, and who is Emu? Obviously from Emu. Well, it would be a great way to do it. It would be like you were playing bowling and got a strike on the first throw. It would be a very good way to do it. So knowing how Oda is, the care he takes with all the mysteries of the work, how he likes to play with us, play with our minds, include foreshadowing, and the attention he has given to everything about Emu, the Ancient Kingdom, and the Void Century, I think this theory makes quite a bit of sense. Now, whether I believe it or not, well, I have my own thoughts about Emu, I have my own thoughts about the world government and the Ancient Kingdom, but as a theory, it makes sense. And if at some point Emu says he is like one of the original D, who knows what the meaning is, the name, because he or she may have even put it, the meaning of the D, and also explain why he betrayed the Ancient Kingdom, what the Ancient Kingdom was, or even if we go crazy and hopefully it happens, Oda, please listen to me, having a flashback of a couple of chapters of Emu through the Ancient Kingdom, seeing firsthand how he betrayed the Ancient Kingdom and how he was creating the world government. Why he did that and explaining everything, that could be crazy. It could break the internet and blow all our minds. So it's something that, whether I believe the theory or not, truly, I would love it, and I would really put money out of my pocket to make this happen. But what do you think? Do you agree with the theory? Do you think Emu could be a traitor of the Ancient Kingdom? Do you think Emu could be a D, who directly betrayed and created everything? And above all, would you like it? Because one thing is what you believe, and another is what you would like. Leave me a comment, and now let's move on to the fourth theory. The fourth theory is something very interesting and something that once again focuses on the Ancient Kingdom. When we talk about the Void Century, there are several topics to address, and one of them is the Ancient Kingdom. But we are going to get to the root of something. We are going to discuss something that is one of the things that make it particularly special to all of One Piece. And just like in Naruto we have the jutsus, or in Dragon Ball we have the Kamehameha and the Dragon Balls, it's true that in One Piece we have something that makes it very different from the rest. And it's a very characteristic thing, especially concerning powers, and it's obviously the devil fruits, the well-known Akuma no Mi. These fruits, like anything in One Piece that comes a bit from the past, are surrounded by an aura of mystery that Oda seems determined. Well, throw us 3 or 4 things, but it's still not the time to resolve it, and it seems that it's going to wait until chapter 1500 to explain it, and at this pace, I see it possible. The thing is that this theory talks about the explanation of the devil fruits being that they were created by the Ancient Kingdom. Then this theory develops a bit further, obviously, but this is like the basis, saying that these fruits come from the Ancient Kingdom and originate from the Void Century. I think if we talk about the fruits and consider that they come from the Void Century, I think it's quite logical that yes, but in my opinion, they could even come from a bit further back based on what's shown in the murals of Elba. But as I said, this theory talks about the devil fruits being created in the Void Century and were created by this ancient kingdom. As I said at the beginning of the video, one of the few things we are somewhat clear about regarding the ancient kingdom is that it was something that was very advanced compared to the rest, but very, very, very advanced to the point that, as I said, not even Vegapunk was able to match it and was many years away from its intellect, with Vegapunk being a person who is too intelligent. But even Vegapunk, when asked about the fruits, he was not able to provide a convincing explanation. He merely limited himself to saying certain theories he had, which weren't too scientific either, but he did make it clear that he had been able to copy certain fruits when creating the Seraphim, which would indicate to us, according to this theory, that the fruits are artificial. And if Vegapunk was able to replicate them, being able to do a kind of reverse engineering with things that are already created to create them from scratch would require much more technology, which would explain that they were created in the Ancient Kingdom, in a kingdom with many more laboratories, with much more technology, with many more scientists, and with people with much more development capacity creating these fruits. So this theory makes sense to me. I think it's quite logical and fairly obvious that it does. I believe what would be very interesting is to try to find out why, because it seems that these fruits were created in the Ancient Kingdom. We all agree it could be like that, more or less, but we also have to think about why that kingdom would create the fruits. And if they created them as weapons, why did they lose? How did they lose with these things? Did they create them in response to an attack from the world government, or is there something else behind it? I think the topic of the fruits, being one of the central pillars of One Piece, could have another layer of depth, not just who created them, but why, and that the reason why is very, very key. In my opinion, I think it would be totally crazy. I think it would be very, very top-notch, and I would really love for it to be explained. But it's true that seeing how the work progresses, it seems Oda is going to save it for a little further in the future. Hopefully not too much, but seeing how the chapters of One Piece are advancing, it seems there's still quite a bit left to talk about this. So, well, I have to say that I like the theory. I do buy that the fruits were created during the Void Century, and it's true that I have some ideas, but I don't want to share them in this video because we're going to talk about theories of the Void Century. In contrast, if you have any ideas about the fruits or something to say about the theory, leave it in the comments because you know I will read it. And now let's move on to the fifth theory. And now, pay attention, because we're going to the madhouse. We're getting a straitjacket, going into a padded room, and staying there for a long time, because we're going to discuss a theory that is too crazy, and if it happens, I don't know what reaction the audience would have. In general, and especially the more devoted One Piece fans, so to speak. And it's that the theory talks of obviously the protagonist of the Void Century, who was Joy Boy, with the permission of Imu, I suppose, and it also talks about our protagonist. And we have seen that obviously Luffy is a parallel to Joy Boy. We have seen that he seems to have the same inherited will when we have seen Joy Boy, even if only in silhouettes. We have seen that he is very similar to Luffy, too similar to Luffy. We see that it seems he wore the same hat. It also seems he had the same fruit. Let's say many similarities, and this is justified with the inherited will, which we have seen throughout the whole work, which Oda has taken care to explain, and Oda loves to do this. You can see he loves the theme of inherited will, and which we have seen with other characters, since when we saw Oden's flashback, we saw Roger's, and we felt that it was very similar to Luffy, with several parallels, even in some scenes or behaviors. So I think this makes a lot of sense, seeing the inherited will from one person to another. And as I say, seeing the inherited will of Luffy that we saw in Roger, it makes a lot of sense that this will comes from way back, and that just like Roger and Luffy, Joy Boy was also involved. But the theory tries to explain it in a way, well, more crazy, less realistic, and, well, much less based on things from the manga, but which also, to my surprise, makes a lot of sense. And, well, I don't know if everyone will like it. The thing is that the theory says there is so much parallelism between Joy Boy and Luffy. There are so many similarities. There are so many coincidences because they are the same person. This is crazy, I know. You're gonna say, well, what are you doing? Stop drinking, stop the alcohol. No, let's see. The theory says that Joy Boy and Luffy are indeed the same person, that this Joy Boy we have seen in memories, that we have seen on the mural, that Nika we have seen so many times is simply Luffy. He has the same fruit, he has the same power, such and such. It's the same. It's exactly the same. This would even explain why Emmett got confused upon seeing him, saying, "Hey, you are Joy Boy." And Luffy was like, "What do you mean, Joy Boy? What are you telling me? Who are you?" But obviously you might say, but this can't be because Joy Boy lived at least 800 years ago, and Luffy, well, is obviously living now. Alright, so the theory talks about time travel. I know someone will say, well, this doesn't make sense. Let's pause for a moment. We've seen the character Toki, who was able to send people to the future and even jump to the future herself. So, if we have seen people jump to the future, why couldn't there be people who jump to the past? The idea is that at some point, both Luffy and all the Straw Hats, they will travel to the past and we will have an arc, which will be the Void Century, but it won't be a flashback. Instead, we will experience it, we will see the Void Century firsthand, and this would explain the entire work of One Piece. Oda wouldn't bother to create a flashback of the Void Century to explain it in a very brief, very undetailed way, and seeing it from someone's point of view, but would send the Straw Hats to the Void Century. We would be there and see everything firsthand, because we wouldn't just see how it happens, but we would make it happen, which would be really crazy. This, as I say, may sound very crazy, but the idea is that One Piece would be a loop. That is, Luffy would be born inheriting Roger's will, who in turn would inherit it from various people, who would be the same Luffy. At some point, Luffy would go so far that he would travel to the past, go back, become Joy Boy, and would be the very person who would make the will be inherited, and outward facing the future, and in this way, it would be a loop. The only thing I don't like about this theory, apart from the fact that obviously it's a very big madness, and I don't know if this could turn out well, is that it is specified to us that the world government won that war and the others lost. So if this were a loop, we couldn't win because Luffy would travel to the past, and then everything would be a loop for Luffy. Fought, lost that fight, and returned to the present and lost again, and so on. And it would all be a loop all the time, which would make no sense because the good guys wouldn't win. And being One Piece, it doesn't quite fit, because if you haven't noticed, Oda usually makes sure that the good guys win and everything ends well. Why? Because he wants to have a banquet, you know, the famous banquet at the end of each arc. And personally, it's one of the things I like the most. I mean, Oda, very well, I mean, keep going that way. But the theory that the world is a loop, that Luffy can travel to the past and so on, to my surprise, has too many positives and too many good points. And if you analyze it from a neutral standpoint, there's the topic of time travel, which is explained with the topic of Toki. And there are all the extreme similarities between Joy Boy and Luffy, because you see Roger and you see Luffy, and you see they look alike, but you can tell them apart. But of Joy Boy, what we've seen is that he is literally Luffy. So there are many concerns with this, and I don't know what could happen. I don't think it will happen because I believe it would be getting into a very tricky situation, and especially because when you introduce time travel to the past, paradoxes and very bad things can be created. It's very difficult to execute a time travel work that involves traveling to the past and changing the present. It's quite complicated. That's why I think Oda did well by introducing travels to the future, because this way you don't alter the past. I mean, I don't know how it would happen, but well, the theory seems super interesting to me. That's why I wanted to bring it up. I wanted to develop it a bit more, and above all, I want you to leave a little comment about what you think of this theory, if you like it or not, and if you would include it in the work. Now, let's move on to the sixth theory. This sixth theory is something very interesting that could happen, and perhaps isn't so far-fetched within what One Piece is. I mean, it's still a slightly crazy theory, and it brings us back to the character of Joy Boy. Don't worry, there are no time travels now. The idea is that, as I say, we don't know much about this character. I repeat that we only know he lived in the Void Century, that he seemingly had the Nika fruit, that he resembled Luffy, and that's it. And this is related to various mysteries that might exist in the world of One Piece. And if we look closely as we have progressed through the entire map of One Piece, there are some very crazy things, islands that do not make sense, things that are like magic. And One Piece has a world, and islands that seem taken out of that, a fairy tale, they seem like islands that are fake. And among so many things, Oda may have included something that is not simply natural to the world of One Piece, but it has a consequence. Something that is placed there very subtly to surprise you, obviously, but since it's the world of One Piece, you say, ah, what a cool place. That's it. And the theory talks about there being a very strong connection, important, between the character Joy Boy and Enies Lobby Island. What's going on with Enies Lobby? Some might ask, why? What connection is there? Enies Lobby is a very strange island. It's a very, very curious place. As we see, there is an island marked with the stone path suspended in the air. There is a very large hole below, and it's a place where it's always sunny. It's a place very, very strange. Perhaps it goes a bit unnoticed because in that arc, we see Robin recount the Ohara flashback, saying the now famous line, "I want to live." We have great battles of the Straw Hats against the CP9, with fights that are utterly legendary, and for me, the best in One Piece. That is Luffy versus Lucci. We also have the Mary going to help the Straw Hats escape. In other words, it's an arc that has many things, and maybe Oda didn't do this just because, but on purpose to distract us a bit. He throws these things in here. Why? Because the entire island of Enies Lobby is very, very key. And let's analyze again everything I've said. It's an island with a very strange structure, with a hole underneath. A giant that no one notices and is there, and above all, it's sunny all day. At first we can't find much explanation for the sun, but maybe for the hole, yes. And it's because after they used the Mother Flame in Lulusia, we can infer, we can assume that this weapon was also used in Enies Lobby. If it was used in Enies Lobby, we justify the hole, but it doesn't explain why the island is half built. That is to say, that weapon should have destroyed Enies Lobby Island. And also, why is it always sunny there? None of this is explained. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Well, this crazy theory connects Enies Lobby with Joy Boy. With an action, with a moment, and with a thing, making everything make sense within the logic of this theory. And the theory says that Joy Boy in the Void Century fought at Enies Lobby against the world government, just like Luffy did. But at some point, the world government decided to use the Mother Flame in its version, probably at 100%, not a part as it is supposed to have been used in Lulusia, and decided to use it against the entire island of Enies Lobby. But at that moment, Joy Boy, seeing that all his Nakama, all his friends, all the people there were going to die, he stretched his body with the Nika fruit, wrapped it around the island of Enies Lobby, and protected it. And that's why we see there is a huge hole, because it did not cover the entire surface, but only that part of the island. That's why the island would still be standing, because it's the part that Joy Boy could wrap, and that he withstood the impact, but Joy Boy died at that moment. He withstood the impact, but after returning to his normal state, after stretching, he died. And this would justify why there is always sun, because having the fruit of the sun god, which we know is now the fruit that has Luffy and that Joy Boy had, well, this caused his will in some way to always remain and made it so that there was always sun. Why? Because as I say, that's where the sun god died. I know it might sound a bit out there, but let's see. We are on an island that, as I said, doesn't have a logical explanation. There are too many crazy things. Some might think this doesn't make sense, but I challenge you to give me a more logical explanation than this. Personally, I think it's a theory I can believe. I'm not saying it will definitely be this way, but I think I've never found myself an explanation for all the strange phenomena that occur on this island that I believe that find meaning and say, okay, that seems fine to me. And this makes a lot of sense, especially as I say, the death of Joy Boy causing there to always be sun. I think that's what convinces me the most, because I can't think of any way to make it always sunny. Mainly because obviously when it's night, the sun shouldn't be shining at that point in the world. But of course, if perhaps Joy Boy died there, it makes it so there's always sun, because his will somehow created a kind of sun. Artificial. And also about the hole, about the island, and the wrapping around it is something that makes a lot of sense. Explaining about the fruit, explaining the hole, and above all, blowing our minds as Oda usually does with these things. Even though it is a very crazy theory, it is quite little known. When I saw it, I was surprised because I had never heard it before, and honestly, I liked it. But I want you to leave in the comments right now if you agree with the theory, if you like it or not. And now, let's move on to the 7th theory, and there is a character from the Void Century, of whom we haven't said anything, and we have covered 6 theories. There are very few characters we know who lived in the Void Century, and of whom we have some minimum knowledge. As I said, Emu, Joy Boy, and the Ancient Kingdom as a general concept, but we forget a character who seems a bit overlooked, but we do know that this person is much older than the Void Century. Going to the murals of Elba, it could directly go to the first world we were taught in the texts, but this is a little further, and it's the character of Zunisha. Yes, that giant elephant that destroyed Jack's ships just by swinging its trunk. And this character is mentioned to be over a C-1,000 years old, which is insanely powerful, very beastly, serving a punishment for something he did but we don't know what, carrying the entire Mink tribe on his back. And as an interesting fact, we saw that Joy Boy and Emu were on top of him when we saw him in the flashback, as they are on one of the pillars we see there. But as I mentioned, we haven't said absolutely anything about this character despite him having gone through the Void Century. So we need to discuss something about him, and I'm not going to tell you exactly what punishment he committed or why he is walking, but I will talk about the explanation. And let's pause for a moment. Zunesha is something completely different from anything we have seen in One Piece. I mean, it's too big. I mean, it's massively big. The only thing we saw similar is what we saw in Thriller Bark, where we saw some shadows that to this day have no explanation. So I don't know how to justify whether it is bigger or smaller than Zunesha. I don't know, but I think it's the only thing we can see that resembles it. But that elephant is truly excessively large. So what about this? What is the theory? The theory tries to justify what Zunesha is as a concept in general, and the theory says that Zunesha is an ancient weapon that ate a devil fruit. Some will say this doesn't make sense because in theory there are only 3 ancient weapons. We know them well, and we have already seen them all and know where they are. We know that Poseidon is Shirahoshi, we know that Pluton is hidden in Wano, and we assume that Uranus is the weapon used by the world government or something along the style. So it doesn't make any sense for Zunesha to be an ancient weapon. But of course, we have to lay our cards on the table, and we must consider that obviously these weapons could be replicable. So who's to say that the original Pluton, for example, is not Zunesha? Just as an example, it could be any of the other 2, and that they are weapons that could be replicable, and that Zunesha could be the first one, or it could be as simple as it being a 4th ancient weapon that we do not know, and that this character was given a devil fruit and became Zunesha. The theory, at first, as I say, might sound very crazy, but there is an interesting argument that could lead us to this, and that is Spandam's sword, Fangfrey, and this sword had a fruit. Do you remember which one it was? Indeed, the elephant one. And this, it could be one of the many foreshadows Oda includes to justify things later. And in a place like Enies Lobby, with characters so linked to the world government and a character like Spandam, it wouldn't make much sense for them to give us a hint, a clue about something we'll see later. And in this case, make the formula of the sword eating an elephant fruit repeat itself again. Perhaps it is something similar, that maybe that ancient weapon also ate an elephant fruit a long time ago. So much time. I know someone will say that there are no 2 devil fruits alike, but as I say, Zunesha comes from more than 1,000 years ago. So who tells you that at that moment they couldn't create 2 fruits? And since Zunesha had eaten one, they decided to replicate it, and that's how the other one Spandam has was created. As I said, this is what the theory says, and it makes a lot of sense. So the theory explains that at some point Oda would reveal Zunesha's true identity, and that it would be, as I said, an ancient weapon that ate us devil fruit. Personally, I must say that the theory doesn't fully convince me, but the arguments are there, and I believe they are presented in a way that if Oda deciding to explain it and include it in the work makes sense, and I think that's the most important thing when creating a theory. So even though I don't like it, the facts are there and it's possible. So let me know in the comments what you think about this, and let's move on to the 8th theory. And now yes, we're gonna talk about a place, but we're not gonna talk about the ancient kingdom, or maybe we will, and we're gonna talk about an island that perhaps could have a slightly more curious secret than we think. As of today, we practically know all the islands that are the world of One Piece, or in the most important ones we've already been, but the only ones we have left to see within the manga, they are Lodestar and Laugh Tale, with the exception of God Valley, which we don't know what happened to it. And this theory talks about the island of Laugh Tale with something curious. We still have several chapters to visit Laugh Tale. We know little about Laugh Tale. We only know that it is where the One Piece is, in case, but if that were not enough, and that Roger visited it and no one else can find it. So we know that this island has something different from the rest, as I say, not only because of the importance of having the One Piece, which is a treasure left by Joy Boy, but also because it seems that this island is hidden from the eyes of the world. And it is very complicated that with all the people in the world of One Piece navigating the sea, no one has found it by chance. Only Roger found it, and to find it, we have to get the 4 red pony glyphs, read them, and then trace a map to reach the island, which is perfect. But the idea that this theory has is that this makes Laugh Tale a much more special island than we initially thought, because let's see, why would this island hide in such a way? Why would so many things have to be done to find an island? Why do we have to read 4 red poneglyphs and do 1,000 things to reach the island? And if that's the case, how was it found the first time? Because I mean, once you have the 4 red poneglyphs, okay, it's perfect that you can reach the island, but how did they arrive at Laugh Tale the first time if no one had written them? I mean, the first time someone arrived, did they have to take all those steps or do all those things mentioned there? And as I said, it doesn't seem like someone found it by chance. So the theory, this idea, suggests that maybe this island is artificially created. By whom? By the kingdom. Ancient. I repeat that the ancient kingdom had technology and things that we cannot imagine today. We have seen many crazy things in the world of One Piece. Even Vegapunk has called them crazier than anything the world government did, things that were very advanced for their time. So from this, we have to consider that it is possible they created an island, and especially that might be that they hid it. And this makes a lot of sense. Let's think, if the ancient kingdom was involved in the poneglyphs, in their creation, in all the writing, and in distributing them through, the world, as we assume with the red poneglyphs, should be the same. And if they also created the red poneglyphs and gave the instructions to find Laugh Tale, it's probably because they hid the island. So what if this is an artificial island created by the kingdom? Ancient, hidden by the ancient kingdom, made in such a way that no one can find it. Joy Boy, who would surely be the mastermind or the most important person of that kingdom, left the most important thing there, and they left it on an island as a secret so that no one could find it, hiding them. Manually, making sure that effectively nobody could find it by chance because they trusted themselves to hide it, and this would drive people crazy looking for the island with no way to find it. Why? Because it is not an island. Natural. It's not something you're gonna find by chance. It's something that's purposely hidden to be able to find it only those who deserve it. And this theory makes too much sense. It explains all the problems with Laugh Tale, explains all the mystery that may surround the ancient kingdom, and explains why nothing of Laugh Tale has been shown to us. Why? Because perhaps if we see the island of Laugh Tale and how it is, and if we see certain things from that island, we can find out that it is an island that is artificially created when this is something that is not very much in the mind of the people, since as the island is talked about as just another island, well, it seems to be a natural island that cannot be reached by circumstances of life. But as I say, it makes no sense that they found it in the first place and then deal with the poneglyphs. It would have to be that they have hidden the island. It's something that makes perfect sense. And this theory, as I say, I like so much and I buy into it so much because it's my theory. It's a theory I've decided to include in the video because I am very convinced of this. I believe the ancient kingdom created this island. I think they hid it themselves. And I think that perhaps the moment Oda is waiting for to reveal things about the ancient kingdom is reaching Laugh Tale, discovering the history of the island, discovering Joy Boy's treasure, and there we would find out, perhaps not 100%, but the most important part of the history of the ancient kingdom, which for me, in my opinion, would be an absolute cinema, and I would love it. Oda, do that. But above all, I want you to leave me comments about what you think of the theory, if you agree, if not, and if you would change something, perhaps. Now, let's move on with the ninth theory. The ninth theory is the most important theory of the entire video because it would cause changes in the world of One Piece that would be crazy and would have already triggered them. And this theory justifies many things that have been told to us in the work, which we are not able to justify, and that could solve mysteries from the entire Void Century and from over 800 years ago. And this theory comes from a premise. The world of One Piece, as we know it, has not always been oriented in the same way. That is, the current distribution of islands, oceans, currents, climates, and even the red line or the calm belt could be the result of a brutal cataclysm that changed the orientation of the planet's poles. We're not talking about a simple earthquake, but a geological event, or an energy event on a planetary scale that rotated the globe on its axis, altering the north and south. And what does this have to do with the Void Century, Joy Boy, or Ibu? Quite a lot. This theory suggests that the Void Century was not a war, it was a cataclysm. During those 100 years erased from official history, there wasn't just a war between the ancient kingdom and the 20 allied kingdoms, the predecessors to the world government, but what also happened in parallel was a geological event. Brutal. There was a pole shift, either literally magnetic or physical, in the rotation of the planetary axis, which totally reconfigured the world. The sea level rose, islands disappeared, the climate changed, and most importantly, the ancient kingdom was erased from the map, not just by the war, but because its location was submerged, displaced, or completely inaccessible. In other words, at some point, the world of One Piece was turned and all the poles were moved, causing a huge disaster. Now, why would this theory make any sense that it happened in One Piece? Let's look at some strange, a bit curious things in the world of One Piece that would be easily explained if this event had occurred. First, the red line. It's a mountain range. It stretches for thousands of kilometers, encircling the entire world in the form of a ring. And if this did not exist before the Void Century and was created as a result of the cataclysm, since it is supposed that if this occurred in the real world, all the landmass would gather around the Earth, just like the case of the Red Line. Then we have the calm belts, 2 strips of sea without wind, impossible to traverse, that also cross the entire world. And what if they are areas directly affected by the change in the planet's orientation? Another thing that would be justified. Then, the Grand Line, its absurd climate, its currents, its storms, all of it could be a direct consequence of the planetary readjustment and the pole shift. And something even curious, the Sky Islands and their ruins. And it's that many civilizations, destroyed in ancient times, they seem to be in the sky. And beyond the knock-up streams, what if they were thrown into the sky by a brutal geological force, like being launched due to the movement of the Earth's crust, or a colossal eruption related to the pole shift? That is, as a result of it stopping, well, everything was thrown and parts of civilizations were launched into the sky and remained on those islands. And then we could even talk about something else, which would be the Mother Flame. And it is that, of course, with the Mother Flame coming into play, pay attention, because this energy source, which is supposedly infinite, that we saw Vegapunk recreated, if we assume that this energy existed 900 years ago, it is possible that the ancient kingdom used it as a technological and energy core, until perhaps the overload or misuse caused this global cataclysm because of it. Mother Flame, from that sun we saw in the Elba mural, and it's said that the Mother Flame could have been the trigger that destabilized the entire planet. This connects with a possible use as an ancient weapon, an energy source so immense that if it gets out of control, it can cause tectonic plates to collapse, generate global earthquakes and tsunamis, and even change the Earth's rotation. The theory says that the activation or explosion of the Mother Flame caused the pole shift, and this altered forever the world, marking the beginning of the new order with the world government at the helm. And as we see, this theory seems very crazy, because it is. It's a super crazy theory, but if we think about it, it justifies many things that could have happened in the world of One Piece. The fact that the Mother Flame exploded, the fact that there was a different event but the poles shifted, are things that might initially seem very crazy, but they help justify many things in the world of One Piece. Now, could this happen within the manga? Well, I believe it could. I personally think this has happened, and that maybe I could justify it with other things I have in my head, but that I will develop more and develop it further later. But I firmly believe that the idea of a pole shift in One Piece makes sense, that the world of One Piece has rotated or something like that has happened, simply because, obviously, the Red Line doesn't appear naturally, and the gun belt, well, the same. So seeing all these things that could only be explained with a pole shift, I think it's too straightforward not to be true, and not exist. But well, I'm aware that it's a far-fetched idea and something too crazy, so let me know in the comments what you think about this. And now, let's move on to the 10th theory. Which is one of the most curious and also most interesting. Well, so we are going to talk about where the ancient kingdom is supposed to have been. The ancient kingdom, as of today, we know it is destroyed, that it doesn't exist, or that there is no record, okay? We know that, but where could it have been located before? Oda might have left us some clues. We might have seen where it could be located, or it was simply in the middle of the sea and was devastated. Well, the theory suggests that it is in a place we have already passed, that we have already seen, and that we saw some time ago. A long time. And the theory makes more sense than it seems. And the theory indicates that Shandora was not just a lost city of gold, but rather the very ancient kingdom, the home of Joy Boy, the core of the whole story. Everything starts with Enel's cover story on the moon. It is said that in the past there were 3 human races that were living on the moon: the Shandians, the Skypians, and the Birkins. These races were technologically very advanced and were the ones who created those little robots we saw there, the ones that appear in Enel's mini story. And they were living peacefully until they ran out of resources and had to come down to the earth. And so the Skypians and the Birkins settled on the islands of the sky, like Skypiea. But the Shandians descended to the earth, descended to the sea, to the blue. But the Shandians went further down, landing on an island shaped like a skull, had a very peculiar shape, which was the island of Jaya. Once on Jaya, the Shandians built a majestic city called Shandora, which interestingly enough, Shandora comes from Sanskrit, which would be Chandra, which means moon. That is, a city with a lunar name founded by a race that came from the moon. This already sounds very strange, but come on, it's not a coincidence. Moreover, they also worship the sun god, which fits even more with the figure of Joy Boy, the solar symbolism and everything there is from One Piece. And here comes the big part. That golden city, which many in Jaya believed was a legend, was real. Nolan saw it, Kalgra lived in it, and when it was destroyed, half of the island was launched into the sky by a current, creating what we would later know as the Upper Yard. But why was this city the ancient kingdom? The key to the theory is that Shandora was not just a city, but a complete kingdom. A very powerful kingdom, very advanced with its own culture, writing, and technology. And now get ready, because I am going to give you the justifications given to substantiate that Shandora was the very same ancient kingdom. The first is that they used poneglyphs, and Robin, when she finds the poneglyphs in Shandora, literally says that this city was protecting the history of the world, just like what the Ancient Kingdom did. The poneglyphs were everywhere in Shandora. There weren't just one or two like on other islands. It seemed to be part of their everyday language. That is to say, the poneglyph language was the language there. And not only that, the poneglyph language is engraved on the buildings, and that is not seen anywhere else. This confirms that they not only used that language for the poneglyphs, but it was their normal language. So yes, the poneglyphs belonged to the Ancient Kingdom, and this language was theirs. Another thing is that it was a prosperous civilization before the Void Century. It is mentioned that the city prospered more than 900 years ago, just before the century Void, and it was destroyed 800 years ago, exactly when it ended, at the same time as the Ancient Kingdom. In other words, the dates match, meaning if Andorra disappears at the same time as the Ancient Kingdom. Coincidence? I don't think so. Then we have that Jaya was shaped like a skull, and here's a detail that I find a gem, and that is, it's said that the island of Jaya, if you put it together as it was originally before it broke apart, it was shaped like a skull. And what does that have to do with anything? Well, what is the symbol of piracy? The skull, the Jolly Roger. And who was the first pirate in the world according to Vegapunk? Joy Boy. Another connection. So if Joy Boy was from the Ancient Kingdom, and the Ancient Kingdom was on an island shaped like a skull, and that island was Jaya, and in Jaya was Shandora, Joy Boy was from Shandora. Therefore, Shandora, it's the Ancient Kingdom. This would also explain why Mock Town, the current town of Jaya, is so pirate-like. Bars, fights, drunks, crazy stories. Because it's built on the ruins of the place where piracy began. They were literally in the cradle of piracy, laughing at him without knowing they are right above. Then we have the worship of the sun god, as Kalgara, the legendary warrior of Shandora, looked very similar to what is later revealed as Nika. We see that he had wild hair, was muscular, smiling, with a spear. It would fit well that the Shandians were the first worshippers of Nika, and that Joy Boy was the chosen one of that deity. This would explain why that ancient and forgotten religion of Nika comes precisely from that city, hence the fear of the world government. The ideology of freedom that Nika represented was born in the Ancient Kingdom, and that is what they wanted to erase. And why did we know nothing about this? Because the world government did everything to erase Shandora from history. It eliminated its records. It probably had something to do with Jaya being blown up into the sky by that current that split the island in half. It hid the poneglyphs that were protected by the descendants of Shandora, and on top of that, controlled the entire history to make it seem like all that were legends, as with Mont Blanc Nolan and the history of Shandora. In conclusion, this theory that Shandora was the Ancient Kingdom is very good, but very, very good. And it makes sense. It has a basis in the manga. Above all, it makes sense of a lot of things that until now were scattered. The theme of the cult of Nika, the obsession with protecting the poneglyph, the skull shape of Jaya, the importance of Skypia, the symbol of piracy. And I find it great, and I love that it all seems to have evidence. And the best part is how everything fits, from the theme of the moon, with what I've mentioned about Chandra, which means moon, Shandora, and all that, to Mock Town having such a pirate atmosphere. And they laugh at piracy itself, and they laugh at certain things when they are in the cradle of everything, obviously going through Joy Boy, Nika, the poneglyphs. That is to say, there are too many coincidences. So seeing all this, it becomes quite clear that this is no coincidence, that there are too many things in place, that this seems to be the case, that Shandora is the Ancient Kingdom, or that it was the capital of the Ancient Kingdom, like little. And I am very sure that the vast majority of people who have heard this theory, after this you will be very convinced that this is so, and that there is more connection than we thought, that you are convinced that the Ancient Kingdom is Shandora. And even those who are not in favor of this, who are somewhat against, who are a little skeptical, you can leave it in the comments, because you know I love reading them, and I want you to tell me in the comments what you think about this theory, if you agree, if you don't, and why. Above all, justify it with argument. We are going to discuss is something that directly tries to relate the names we know from the Davy clan with another person. As of today, we know that Rox D. Xebec belonged to the Davy clan, and that he is the person who revealed the existence of this clan to us, as he hid his name by calling himself Rox when his name was Davy. And it also mentions that the world government tried to hide this clan, given that a certain specialty has been attributed to this clan, a specific tone has been given to it, because we know that the government has had other members of the D clan in its own navy, such as Monkey D. Garp, Monkey D. Dragon, Jaguar D. Saul and someone else that Oda will introduce from now until the end of the work, and the world government has done nothing. In contrast, with the Davy clan, we have seen everything that has happened in God Valley, the importance they have given it, and everything Rox D. Xebec tells us, who also says that it is likely because, even though he does not have much information about this Davy clan, he knows they are descendants of Davy Jones. Important phrase, because let's remember that when he saw Imu-sama, which hasn't been talked about much, it went a bit unnoticed that Rox stood in front of Imu in the flower chamber and taunted him as he wanted. He said he was a big fan of Davy Jones, and this was obviously a nod to say that he was from the Davy clan, plain and simple. This, which at first we saw as a very curious phrase, and that simply seemed a bit unnoticed, we have finally seen as a kind of nod, a kind of tease, as if saying, I know about Davy Jones, I am a big fan of him, and I know there is something about this man that you did not like, and therefore this Davy clan has already attracted a lot of attention and generated much expectation. Then we have the case of the son of Rox D. Zebek, who is Marshall D. Teach, who we currently know is called Davy D. Teach. And so, this character is also someone who has sparked a lot of interest in the entire One Piece world, becoming one of the 4 emperors, being the first character to have consumed 2 devil fruits, as far as we know, and being an imminent danger to the world government and to the entire stability of power and the world of One Piece. A character that could be considered, at least I consider it that way, as the final villain of One Piece, even above Umusame, but I'm not going to get into that topic of who will be the final villain and who won't, because I think that's for another video, and I've already mentioned it several times. The thing is, we know these 2 members. We know them more or less well as far as it goes. It's true that we haven't had very extensive development of either of them, although perhaps in the Rox flashback we've learned much more than we initially expected. It's true that there are many things left to see, and many things to learn about these 2. Well, there is a character who is their ancestor, named Davy D. Jones, and he is the character about whom we do not have information yet, but it is true that he has been mentioned before in One Piece, and when I say before, I mean in the Foxy arc, since Chopper asks Robin who Davy Jones is, without mentioning the D. In between, because we didn't know what a D was, well, Robin mentions that he is an ancient pirate who died a long time ago and fell to the bottom of the sea, and there is even talk of Davy Jones's locker as something very important. We will discuss this much more in depth in a theory at the end of the video, but the clear thing is that this character was very important, so much so that as Rox D. Zebek himself says, being someone as dangerous as he was important, it suggests to us that he has a connection with the world government, why they hid his name, why they hid the D. I suppose because if you notice, if Robin calls him Davy Jones and not David D. Jones, it's because that D is also hidden. That is to say, there is something similar here to what they tried to do with Gol D. Roger, hiding the D of a very important character. Well, the first theory is precisely about this, and of course it is said that Davy Jones was a very important pirate and even has a bit of a bad reputation, at least in popular culture. In the Legends of the Real World, as we will discuss later, and I will explain in much more detail, because one of these theories fully develops everything about Davy Jones, so you can understand it well in the real world. It is true that there is the typical stereotype of a bad pirate, an evil pirate, a pirate we could liken to a Rox, a Blackbeard, and that fits very well with that profile, a very chaotic pirate, and who does not? We would not associate at all with Luffy or something like that, since the theory says that Davy Jones was Joy Boy. And this is very important because there are many people here who make a big mistake, and that is when they hear about Joy Boy. There is a large part of the One Piece fandom, which I must say surprises me, who think that Joy Boy is the name of Joy Boy, when it is not. Joy Boy is a nickname. Joy Boy means, well, happy boy, a happy person. It's a nickname given to a person who probably had a personality very similar to Luffy because they share the same will. And if you had to describe Luffy, you would say he's a joyful boy, right? It's a perfect description. So it's a nickname given to a person, and it's the nickname of Joy Boy. Not his name, we don't know Joy Boy's name. And there are several theories about the name of Joy Boy. Could I bring 5 theories about Joy Boy or something like that later on? Let me know in the comments if you want me to bring it or if you have any theory about Joy Boy, but it is said that the real name of Joy Boy was David Jones and that this was the name of Joy Boy. Some might think this doesn't make sense, but let's see. Let's analyze the situation. When it's said that this doesn't make sense, the idea is that it can't be because the descendants are Rox and Blackbeard, who are precisely a will, let's say, opposite to what Joy Boy was, and who don't fit at all with this, who moreover don't seem like the type of people who would descend from someone like him. But in One Piece, it has been shown many times that being a parent or child is irrelevant in many aspects. Yamato and Kaido are nothing alike in personality. We even have the example of Shanks and Garland, where each follows a different way of life simply because they were raised in very different environments, even though one is the father of the other. So, the family issue personally doesn't matter to me. And if we have to add to this that Joy Boy existed 800 years ago, or perhaps a little more, it is obvious that over 800 years, families can become corrupted and end up having descendants like Rox or Blackbeard who are a bit different from what their ancestor was 800 years ago, which makes a lot of sense. So I think this argument used to dismiss the theory that David Jones's Joy Boy is something that can be overlooked a bit, and personally I wouldn't pay much attention to it. To me, proposing the idea that Davy Jones's Joy Boy seems to fit quite well, since if we analyze it from a perspective where this is really the case and assume it is something real, we see that it fits quite well. We see that he is a pirate with a legend that labeled him as a sea demon or something like that, which would make a lot of sense because the world government has shown us many times that it manipulates information, manipulates the truth, and even tries to make people believe different versions of the same story, altering them even completely to the point that they do not resemble the originals at all. We have the explanation that they have taken the day from Davy Jones, said by Rox D. Xebec, and even that it surely has to do with him because he is a descendant of him. Then we have the foreshadowing, which we could interpret in this way, of Rox telling Emu that he is a fan of Davy Jones, implying that surely Emu, who probably lived in the Void Century, knew this person. That is to say, implying that there probably was a relationship. And what person could we understand had some kind of relationship with Emu? Well, Joy Boy, since it is assumed that he was the person Emu fought against 800 years ago, so maybe it could be a bit of foreshadowing. Then we have the point that Rox D. Xebec said, "I will come back later and finish you off, Emu." So this can be interpreted as something that will happen with Blackbeard, but perhaps it is something that has been repeating for a long time, and at one time happened with Joy Boy. I am not saying that Joy Boy is bad because of what we said before, but simply that they are descendants. This is something that could happen. Keep in mind that when talking about pirates, let's say in the hierarchy of supreme pirates in real life, in mythology or pirate legends, the most powerful pirate, the fiercest pirate, is Davy Jones. He is like the quintessential pirate. And if we want to represent this figure of Joy Boy in One Piece, representing it with Davy Jones, I think it can be something interesting, something that everyone understands, something that fits well with the real life aspect, and I think it makes sense. Well, I am not the creator of the theory, I am just conveying it, and I have to say that I like it as a theory, honestly. I wouldn't tell you that it's my definitive theory by any means, because I think in this video we are going to see very interesting theories about this, but the fact of suggesting that the name Joy Boy has already been shown and is Davy Jones, I think it would be very interesting. Now, as I say, there are other options that we will discuss here, and maybe they would be better. As for the name of Joy Boy, well, I don't know what to tell you, but I am quite sure that as of today, we already know the name of Joy Boy. And this obviously does not mean that I know what Joy Boy's name is, but that we have probably heard it already. Let's remember Binks' sake. Binks is probably going to be someone we see at some point in the world of One Piece, in the Void Century, or even before. And who is to say that Binks is not the name of Joy Boy? I think it would make quite a bit of sense for it to be called something D. Binks. I think it would make a lot of sense. Even if he's called Seike and the song was made for him and he's called Seike D. Binks, it would be incredible. Or maybe one of the other random names we've overlooked throughout the work of One Piece. The name Nolan, it could be Nolan D. And that this is also the name of Joy Boy and that he is from that clan. I don't know. The thing is, I am quite convinced that as of today, we do know the name of Joy Boy, but we still don't know which of all these names it is. And obviously, among them is the option of Davy Jones. I like it as a first theory. Let me know in the comments what you think, and let's go with the second one. Regarding the second theory, let's go with something very similar to what we just discussed. Something very, very similar, so we will have the same foundations. Let's consider who Davy Jones is, the importance of Davy Jones, all the mythology surrounding him, and the type of character he is. But this time, let's assume that this character, the identity this character has, is a very different one. It's not Joy Boy. It's not Joy Boy at all, but something much simpler, something much easier to interpret, and something that everyone will understand very easily because the same pattern keeps repeating. When we see Rox D. Xebec and when we see Blackbeard, we understand that they are the negative side, so to speak, of Roger and Luffy. They are like the antithesis, like the perfect enemy, and like a perfectly written and perfectly matched counterpart. They are exactly the opposite, and they are mirrors that look very good and are parallels that fit very well within the work. Now, having been revealed, all the information we have about Davy Jones, and seeing that a kind of pattern is followed with Rox and Blackbeard, who are very similar, who have that same will, who also want to cause chaos, even though they might not be as bad as we initially thought, but simply have very bad traits, though not to overly extreme levels, and we might even see other things. Well, it could be that the thing with Davy Jones is something very, very simple. And it's not that he is Joy Boy, but rather that he was that evil Joy Boy, which in fact I have mentioned many times on this channel. I have called him Sad Boy or something like that. Then on top of that, the thing about Sad and Bo came out. Well, it seems a bit like there might be some reference to that, but I'm not gonna talk about that. Let's talk about Davy Jones, and just as I say, he could be this counterpart to Joy Boy. Throughout the entire history of One Piece, we have been told about Joy Boy. We have heard of Joy Boy, we have seen the mural, we have had Amu. But we have never been told, at least to us, about that whole counterpart of Joy Boy, when it is quite obvious that it existed, because it existed in Roger's time, it exists in Luffy's time, and it makes a lot of sense that just as we had this will with Luffy, Roger, and Joy Boy, that this will is held by Blackbeard, Rox, and this person, who very likely, based on how they are introduced in the plot, how it is explained, how the story developed to the point where they told us this, and the next person who inherited this, Will was a member of the same family. Well, possibly this counterpart is the enemy of Joy Boy, Davy Jones. As I mentioned before, Davy D. Jones was brought up by Robin in Long Ring Long Land, and we have the Davy backfight, this thing introduced by Foxy that has the name Davy in the middle, which we actually saw Rox use to form his crew. The origin of this is still unknown to us. Later on in a theory, we will address this as well because it is interesting, but we do not know the origin of this tradition, and we have seen that Rox has also done this to implant it in our minds and not let us forget it. So is it possible that maybe when we see Davy Jones, we will see how the Davy backfight is created and that it is a ruse, a trick, a masterstroke by Davy Jones, that his part was the same as Rox was for Roger, and the same as Blackbeard was for Luffy, an antithesis being the antithesis of Luffy, and that we see how he creates this, and it has a certain relevance in the story at even much higher levels than we thought. I think it makes sense. As I said before, when we think of Davy D. Jones, we think of the ultimate pirate. We think of something very, very pirate-like, but it's also thought of as a bad part, a negative part, a very chaotic part. And seeing how Oda is playing with the theme of inherited will with Rox, with Blackbeard and everything, I think it makes sense. By the way, I'm gonna keep calling Xebec Rox all the time. I'm not gonna call him Davy D. Xebec or anything, really. I'm going to keep calling him Rox because I'm used to it, and it will be hard for me to get used to something else. I know you might think this theory is a bit simple, a bit obvious, very straightforward, but sometimes in One Piece, we overthink things, imagining very crazy ideas, and in the end, Oda takes the shortest, simplest path. And sometimes we think so much about things that we can't see what's right in front of us. Maybe there is no Joy Boy or anything, and it's simply the antithesis, as they have shown us with Blackbeard and Rox, the antithesis. Something that is explained, something we have seen, something the viewer understands clearly, and when Davy Jones is presented, we easily understand through 2 or 3 dialogues who Davy Jones is, how he is the antithesis, and we see that's it, what kind of character he is, because we have seen it reflected in Rox and Blackbeard. I think it's quite simple, and makes a lot of sense. On a personal level, I think it makes sense. It is true that I like the idea of it being a simple theory, but for me, since I'm a bit crazy, I always like it when we don't expect anything, when it catches us off guard, when we go left and it surprises us from the right. I always like to give everything a twist, and I would love it if we didn't expect at all what happens with this character, that it would come from another angle, and that maybe, as I say, it would be Joy Boy. Now, I think it's quite obvious that this theory needs to be discussed, it needs to be addressed, and above all, you need to let me know in the comments what you think of this theory, because it's only the second one, we have 3 more to go, but despite being a relatively simple theory, I think it has a good chance of being true and coming to pass. But well, let me know what you think, and let's move on to the third. Moving on to the third theory, let's go to something curious, something that might be revealed in the upcoming manga chapters. I hope it takes a bit longer, honestly, because making videos and then maybe spoilers come out or something, and this information gets revealed or not, and this is something I don't like. I don't read the spoilers personally. I prefer to read the chapters directly and enjoy reading them, but there's always people in the comments saying, haha, you got it right. Haha, you didn't get it right with the spoilers. So it's a bit uncomfortable. Well, this theory about the Davy clan is about something that is a capability of the clan itself, as if they were a different clan, as if they were a clan that goes far beyond the name, as if they had a characteristic that the rest of the clans did not have. And it's that this Davy clan, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, has been given a very, very different importance from everything we expected, from everything previously shown in One Piece. Because as I said, we've seen people from the D clan whom the government has had close by, and they haven't given them much importance. And it is true that except for the case of Roger, where obviously because he became the Pirate King, they hid the D, we haven't seen anything too crazy. I mean, they had Garp, they had Jaguar D, Saul, they had Dragon, who were people from the D clan, and they were not given importance. Maybe they were from the Monkey or Jaguar family, which they didn't care much about, perhaps because they were slightly more irrelevant families. Well, here's the thing. What if the Davy clan has something that the rest of the clans don't have? And when I say one thing, it is a very important, very dangerous characteristic that we have already seen, and that perhaps there could be certain hints throughout the story that lead us to think this. What if the Davy clan is capable of consuming 2 devil fruits, or even more, which we still do not know? For now, the only person we have seen capable of consuming 2 devil fruits as of the recording date is Marshall D. Teach, who is from the Davy clan. Who is Davy D. Teach, the only person? To this day, we have no explanation for why Blackbeard managed to consume these 2 devil fruits. There are many theories, many. I can even have other theories, but there is a very important, very striking one that talks about it being related to the Davy clan. First of all, because as I say, it seems that a different importance has been given to the Davy clan, a more significant importance, if you will, by the world government to this clan. Perhaps it is because they know they can consume these devil fruits. But now, what kind of clue can we have to think this? The first thing is to go to when Blackbeard is going to consume the second fruit. We see that he covers himself with a black blanket, maybe to mislead. The theory suggests it's a bit to mislead, and Shiryu asks if this doesn't work, if they will separate, and they imply that it's not something 100% certain, and that it's more like a kind of gamble, or something like that. And then we see that he eats the second fruit, and Marco mentions that Teach always had a different body. What if the Davy clan has a different body, has something different that makes them just from that clan and allows them to eat a second fruit? Then we have to remember, right at the mention of the Davy clan's name, in the Great Revelation by Rox D. Zebek, that he mentions that one thing he told Teach and his wife was to trust in the Davy clan. And perhaps this is the phrase that Blackbeard has followed throughout his life. Maybe he thought about that, about trusting the Davy clan, knowing that he had the ability to consume 2 or 3 fruits, and that obviously is a very beastly power. So he waited and waited to get the fruit he needed, trusted the Davy clan, ate the second fruit, which was Whitebeard's, and maybe by trusting more in the Davy clan, he can eat that third one. Implying that indeed the Davy clan is something different, something that sets it apart from the rest of the clans, and justifying why the world government has gone to such lengths with this Davy clan to hide the name of Davy Jones and turn it into an urban legend to make the Davy clan itself have to hide, something we haven't seen with the other clans, and this makes it a bit different. Additionally, justifying one of the craziest things we've seen a character do in One Piece, and it's from the Davy clan. Because I repeat, precisely the craziest thing, which has no solution, which is a great mystery, which is a big problem for everyone, is that someone has consumed 2 devil fruits, and the little information we have is talking about his body, that his father told him to trust in the Davy clan, and let's not forget that Saturn told Katarina Devon and Van Augur that Teach came from a special lineage, obviously referring to the Davy clan. But why mention special lineage when, I repeat, there are other D, and this is not mentioned at any time. Not even the name of Luffy, which is Monkey D. Luffy, is given any special connotation. Not at all. We have seen how Alberosa has talked about Luffy, has talked about the Gomu Gomu, has talked about the Nika fruit, but has never talked about lineage, being like the Monkey D clan. Well, it didn't matter. And maybe it's because the Monkey D clan isn't relevant, but another type of clan, the Davy clan. I don't know, to me this theory seems very interesting. It seems simple, very simple to explain, and I think if it's an explanation for why Blackbeard has eaten 2 fruits, I might like it. It's not the theory I have in mind. I've already explained it to you a couple of times. I'm not going to go into that. But I find this very interesting because perhaps Oda, if he doesn't want to complicate things and wants all his readers to understand it simply, says that it's from the Davy Clan, that the Davy Clan can consume 2 fruits, that the government was after them because of their ability, because it's something they're born with, and that's it. He doesn't complicate things, that's it. Marco didn't understand about his body because the Davy Clan was hidden. I think it's something very logical and makes a lot of sense. Maybe something about this will be revealed in God Valley. I don't know, let's hope so, but let it take a little longer, a month if possible, 2 months, 3 months, however long it takes will be fine, but let's get information about this, and I think it's a simple way to explain it. As I said, I'm not entirely convinced because I have another idea that I like more, but the idea evaluating it fully in itself and from an objective point of view, I think it's a quite interesting and quite good theory. So as I said, I like it quite a bit, but well, let me know in the comments what you think of this 3rd theory and let's move on to the 4th. Regarding the 4th theory, let's take an even crazier twist to all of this. In the first 2 theories, we talked about the identity of Davy Jones. We talked about Joy Boy and that evil Joy Boy of that time. Well, let's go even further. Let's give it the ultimate twist. What if Davy Jones is Sogeking? No, it's a joke, it's a joke, one moment. It would have been incredible if I came up with a well-argued 20-minute theory on why Davy Jones is Sogeking, but that's not going to happen. Let's go with something else. Let's go with another identity. There is a very, very important character in One Piece, about whom we know nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean not even his name, because I am quite convinced that it is a nickname, what we know about him, and that's it. We don't have his voice, we don't have his face, we don't have his name, we don't know where he comes from, we are not even clear on what he is. And it's Imu. What if Davy Jones is Imu? Some might say this doesn't make sense. Okay, let's analyze the situation. As I mentioned before, the legend of Davy Jones, even though it's manipulated by the government, is still quite well known in the world of One Piece. In the pirate world, the name Davy Jones is quite well known, as we have seen it at some point in the work, and if the world government had really wanted to completely hide this name, being a somewhat known name, they would have done so. Look at the name Rox D. Xebec, there aren't many characters who know it, and until practically Wano, we hadn't heard anything about him. And considering that was 40 years ago, I mean, we're talking about Davy Jones being around 800 years ago or more. That is, if 40 years ago they already hid something well, imagine 800 years ago. So why haven't they been able to completely hide something from 800 years ago? Well, there's a theory that points out the following. First of all, we know that Davy Jones had a D and that he was, well, David D. Jones. Well, there is a lot of talk that Imu could be him. Why? Because there is a very famous theory that says Imu is a D, that he is a traitor, that he betrayed the D clan and eventually became the leader of the world government. This, combined with the presentation of David D. Jones as what I say, a D, and coming from those like Rox and Blackbeard, are 2 characters who tend towards betrayal, who tend towards evil, who tend towards that desire to achieve everything and accomplish their goals. And it could make for a very interesting twist if it is revealed that Imu is Davy Jones. Because let's think, if the world government hasn't managed to completely eliminate the legend of Davy Jones, it's because that name, it was a very powerful name, very important. Notice that the name Joy Boy is practically extinct, practically erased, but Davy Jones is part of a legend. Why? Perhaps because this character became more known than Davy Jones for his own betrayal. Perhaps Davy Jones, because of the betrayal he committed and how he allied with the other kingdoms, and all the things he did, that name spread across the kingdoms, remaining somewhat because the enemy they had was Joy Boy, but they didn't give importance to this. They gave importance the one who betrayed the D clan and who helped the other kingdoms, being this Imu. As I say, Imu is surely not his name. Imu is surely a nickname that Oda is using for some reason. We still don't understand why, and very likely, as I say, it's Imu's nickname and not his name. The theory, which I repeat is not my theory, is a general theory, let's say, suggests that this Davy Jones is the ultimate pirate, the person Joy Boy fought against 800 years ago, and who is now an Imu. And a very strong clue might be precisely when Rox said he was a big fan of Davy Jones, this being a nod from Oda, not for Imu, not for Rox, but for the viewers, mentioning that name right in front of him as he is saying it to Davy Jones. Imagine the revelation that Imu is Davy Jones, and we see this page again. We will be shocked because we will say, did Oda really have the nerve to tell us he's a big fan of Davy Jones right in front of Davy Jones himself, without us even having a clue about this? And on top of that, with a character like Rox, who is his descendant, it makes a lot of sense, and I think it would be very, very top. Analyzing this theory, let's say, more in depth, I'm not sure if it completely convinces me. I think that Davy Jones being erased by the government wouldn't convince me if it were because they want to erase him because he is Imu. I would prefer if they tried to erase him because he was something different, because he was an enemy, or someone, as I say, evil, but not precisely Imu. I don't know, it's a theory that doesn't completely convince me. I know that in the comments, more than one of you are going to say, hey, I like this theory, I find it interesting. Or it might even be that someone has already thought of this theory before. As I said, the theory is not mine. The theory is general, let's say, from the internet, like all the ones in this video. But even so, regarding the true identity of Davy Jones, I think the three most relevant theories we have today, or that I have considered and found most relevant and important, are precisely the three I have mentioned. Now we will move on to the last one, which is quite extensive, where we will cover many things, but as for the true identity of this character, be careful, because perhaps Oda has more to say. It's no coincidence that so many theories come up. If there are so many, it's because there's material to play with, and when Oda has good material, we know what he's capable of doing, which are true wonders. So, well, let me know in the comments what you think about this fourth theory. Leave it there a bit in the comments. And now, let's move on to the fifth and final theory of the video, which is very long, but I think you're gonna love it. And it's quite clear that the canonical information we have about Davy Jones in One Piece is very little. That's why I'm going to do my best to build mountains with the little pieces of data we have. But as of today, with what we have, it's impossible to put together a complete story. So actually, the only reason it's even possible to discuss Davy Jones is because Davy Jones is a real-life pirate legend. That is, we can draw information from real life, since from the series, well, for now, we don't have much, and I'm sure that most people who have watched One Piece have also seen Pirates of the Caribbean, and vice versa. I, for example, have not seen Pirates of the Caribbean, but I had to research to make this video. I should watch them, let me know in the comments. As I was saying, Davy Jones is a very well-known name in popular culture, and it is logical to assume that although there will obviously be some differences, much of Davy Jones's story in One Piece will be based on existing mythology, just as Oda has done with other legendary characters. Exactly like the character of Loki, the giant prince, because if we look at him and compare him with the Loki from Norse mythology, at first glance, they are very different. But in the fundamental and most important aspects, they are essentially the same, while being, as I said, quite different at the same time. Anyway, I might be going on a bit, but I want us to think of Davy Jones with that mindset. That's how Oda usually works. When you better understand the legend that inspires a character, you will better understand the character itself. So let's start directly with the story of Davy Jones in mythology. And it is much simpler than one might think, because unlike many characters from various mythologies that Oda has adapted in One Piece, Davy Jones himself does not have a very concrete story. Historically, Davy Jones is basically just a name associated with pirate life. In fact, when talking about Davy Jones, it almost always refers to Davy Jones's locker, which is a nautical euphemism for death at sea. In pirate tradition, Davy Jones is often presented as a sort of ruler of the pirate underworld. In many representations, he is literally depicted as the demon of the sea, so if we base it only on that, it seems we don't know much about Davy Jones, and the theory would have to end here. But actually no, because there are two additional resources we can use to reconstruct the story of this character. The first would be the legend and mythology of Davy Jones, which has always intrigued people for a long time. It is natural that there are academic theories about what his real origin might be. Even if we don't know the exact truth, these theories are relevant to our discussion. And the second thing is that sometimes the historical truth behind an inspiration for One Piece is not the most important. That's how myths and legends are. Perhaps there was some real event that originated them, but over time they become stories told in different ways, with many creative liberties. That's why the character of Davy Jones in One Piece could very well end up having much in common with the popular fictional version of Davy Jones. For example, as I say, the one from Pirates of the Caribbean. In addition to the little we know in the manga, Oda is not exactly a purist of mythology, and I hate to break illusions, but in the original legends, Davy Jones was not a giant squid, nor did he sail on the Flying Dutchman. In fact, the Flying Dutchman was another separate pirate legend that Disney decided to mix with Davy Jones, and it really worked for them. Legends and myths tend to be that malleable. Alright, here goes a brief summary of the story of Davy Jones according to Disney and Pirates of the Caribbean. Originally, Davy Jones was simply a man, a pirate, and sailor. The exact circumstances vary in the stories, but essentially Davy Jones fell in love with a sea goddess, beautiful and fickle, named Calypso. As proof of his love, he agreed to fulfill a task that the goddess assigned him, to guide the souls of those who perished at sea to their eternal rest. The idea is that Davy Jones could only return to reunite with Calypso on her island once every 10 years. He accepted that deal out of love, but he was deceived and betrayed. When he returned to the island after 10 years hoping to find her, Calypso was not there. It's curious because many think of Davy Jones as the devil of the sea, but in Pirates of the Caribbean, the real devil is Calypso. Davy made a deal with Calypso, who would be the equivalent of the devil in that story, and he didn't get what he wanted. On the contrary, he was condemned to a rather horrible fate, doing something for all eternity that he really didn't want to do. Due to this betrayal, Davy Jones convened the First Pirate Brotherhood Council, a great alliance of pirates, and conspired with them to seize control of the seas from the goddess Calypso. Ultimately, the Brotherhood managed to imprison Calypso by trapping her essence within the body of a mortal woman. Despite achieving revenge in this way, Davy remained heartbroken by the love he had for her, so much so that due to the pain he felt, he tore out his heart with his own hands and locked it away in the famous dead man's chest. In practice, you can see it as Davy Jones removing his own soul. After that, he became an evil being. He renounced his sacred duty to guide souls in the afterlife and instead began recruiting those who did not want to die into his crew, basically enslaving fearful sailors. Davy Jones took advantage of people's fear of dying without fulfilling their goals, becoming something like a literal demon of the sea. Over time, the entire conflict of Pirates of the Caribbean revolves around the heart of Davy Jones. Whoever controls his heart controls the man, and this is where the story gains interesting depth. You see, Davy Jones was part of the pirate council that initially united to defeat the sea goddess because they saw her as the devil to conquer, but then Davy Jones became the devil. So, the Pirate Brotherhood had to gather again and decided to release Calypso to help them fight against Davy Jones, now turned into a monster and also against the Navy. There is something cyclical in all this that fits well with the world of One Piece. Essentially, whoever holds the power ends up becoming the devil of the story. First, the sea goddess Calypso was the villain, then it was Davy Jones, then it was the trading company, which was the Navy, when it gained Davy Jones's power, and then the pirates again, when they released Calypso, making deals with the devil and ending up becoming the devil themselves in each cycle. In other words, the devil keeps changing faces, but at each stage of the adventure, the Sea Warriors are fighting against some incarnation of evil. In the end, while everyone was fighting each other, pirates against pirates, pirates against the Navy, deep down, they were all fighting for the same thing, only each side had its own vision of what the true evil to defeat was. Summarizing the story of Davy Jones in Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy Jones had a love story. Davy Jones was betrayed. Davy Jones lost his soul by removing his heart. Davy Jones became a demon, and the way to free him from his curse in the end was to kill him. Davy Jones had to die to be free. Now then, we will later revisit some details of Pirates of the Caribbean that I haven't mentioned yet, because I believe the story of Davy Jones in One Piece will share many of these key elements, but let's move on to what we know within the world of One Piece itself. The only real information we have been given about Davy Jones in the manga is told to us by Nico Robin during the Foxy Saga. Robin mentions that Davy Jones was a pirate from a very, very long time ago, and that he was cursed by a demon. And honestly, just with that, it already sounds quite close to everything we just reviewed. But as I mentioned before, even though there isn't a real historical tale of Davy Jones in our world, there are indeed investigations and theories about the origin of the name Davy Jones. It may not be the definitive truth, but it's as close as we can get to a historical basis for this legend, and it's worth discussing. Specifically, I want to talk to you about the theory that the name Davy Jones actually comes from the biblical story of the prophet Jonah. And I'll say it right away, those who are into theories know that Oda has been heavily inspired by the Bible, so this already makes some sense, right? I won't go into all the details of Jonah's story, because not all are relevant. I prefer to give a summary of who Jonah was and why he is related to Davy Jones. The most characteristic thing about Jonah is that at first he refused to obey a direct order from God. Essentially, Jonah fled from what God had commanded him to do. There are different interpretations of why he did it, but we can assume that Jonah was afraid to fulfill that divine mandate. The fact is that God had ordered Jonah something very specific, to go preach to a city full of wickedness to offer them salvation. And Jonah didn't like that idea one bit. He thought those wicked people didn't deserve to be saved. In fact, later in the story, when God actually forgives that city, Jonah gets very angry. Jonah didn't want to save the wicked. Returning to the part where Jonah flees, Jonah boarded a ship to escape the assigned mission, and then God unleashed a great storm at sea to prevent him from fleeing. The sailors on the ship panicked, and Jonah, knowing he was the cause of the disaster, confessed to them that the storm was his fault for disobeying God. He even told them to throw him into the sea to calm the storm and save their lives. This shows that Jonah was willing to face the consequences of his actions. He offered himself as a sacrifice to appease divine wrath. Although more than genuine repentance, it seemed basically a kind of resignation. Basically, Jonah preferred to die rather than fulfill the order of God that he so detested. Then, in the midst of this furious storm, the sailors finally threw Jonah into the sea. But God did not intend for Jonah to die there. Instead, he sent a great fish, traditionally interpreted as a whale, which swallowed Jonah whole. Jonah remained alive inside the whale for 3 days and 3 nights. That time, inside the belly of the cetacean, was a kind of personal purgatory for Jonah. It served for him to reflect and pray, to think about what had happened and why he was wrong to disobey. A bit of sailor context. In the nautical culture of the past, it was considered that having a Jonah on board brought bad luck. Imagine the sailors are at sea and suddenly a terrible storm breaks out. They would look at each other searching for the jinx. Who is the Jonah on this ship? Who do we have to throw overboard? That is to say, Jonah became synonymous with a person who brings bad luck at sea, and all this fits quite well with the similarity between the name Jonah and Jones. It is believed that the term Davy Jones might have originated as a deformation or evolution of Jonah. On the other hand, Davy sounds similar to devil in some old maritime languages, so some think that Davy was a nickname given to certain spirits or entities, like saying the devil Jones, which is where Davy John would come from. In short, that's how language evolves. One day, someone says something to another, others like how it sounds. Everyone starts repeating it, and in the end, no one remembers where it exactly came from. The other specific part of the legend of Davy Jones is his famous locker, Davy Jones's locker. In sailor jargon, as we said, it's a euphemism for death at sea, but it doesn't refer to death itself, rather a kind of final resting place beneath the waves. Notice that Davy Jones's locker is never exactly described as hell or the afterlife. It is more like a kind of purgatory, an intermediate place between life and death for those who die at sea. In Pirates of the Caribbean, in fact, Davy Jones's job was to guide souls to the afterlife. But first, those souls passed through Davy Jones's locker, a marine limbo before their final destination. This makes a perfect parallel with Jonah inside the whale. Jonah was in a state where he was neither dead nor alive, suspended in the darkness of the fish's belly. But why am I telling you all this? Well, because I believe that the story of Jonah could be exactly the inspiration for Oda for the character of Davy Jones in One Piece, both his personality and certain key events in his life. In general terms, Jonah was someone with a strong sense of morality, who nevertheless was filled with hatred towards the wicked. He wanted the wicked to suffer and be condemned, and it was very difficult for him to learn compassion. Jonah saw himself as a righteous man who wanted to save the innocent, but at the same time, he wished to punish the wicked mercilessly. Now, why am I so sure that Davy Jones in One Piece will be based on Jonah? Well, because knowing Jonah's story, we already have a character in One Piece whose story fits that mold too well. That character is Rox D. Xebec. For now, the information we have portrays Rox D. Xebec is surprisingly a guy with good intentions at heart. We know that Rox wanted to dethrone the Celestial Dragons and become the king of the world, but we still don't have the full story of his motives. Even so, with what we already saw in the God Valley flashback, it's very clear that his crusade implied that the world government was evil, practically the enemy of humanity in his view. Just like Jonah, who saw the sinful city as something that had to be destroyed. There is a very revealing detail in God Valley, and it is that when Rox meets the king of Elbaf, who is in the holy land of Mary Geoise, Rox's face shows surprise and annoyance, and he says something like, "A giant in the holy land? Is this guy lost or what?" Rox knows that the celestial dragons enslaved giants, and seeing that giant there clearly strikes him as curious. This suggests that Rox had a sense of justice or compassion towards those who suffered under the Celestial Dragons. I might be reading too much into it, but take a look. Prince Loki of Elbaf idolizes Rox D. Zebek, and during the attack on Elbaf, when Loki faces the Holy Knights, he says, "I would never join scum like you." Considering that Loki himself has said his goal is to destroy the world, and still thinks the Celestial Dragons are much worse than him, I imagine that Loki, as a fanatic disciple of Rox, is repeating something Rox used to say. Loki hates the Celestial Dragons because Rox instilled that in him indirectly, and I think it's very significant that Loki worshipped Rox, because the narrator in the manga reveals to us that Rox D. Zebek worshipped Davy Jones. Do you see? Loki idolizes Rox. Rox idolized Davy Jones. Davy Jones, according to real-world historians, is based on Jonah. Everything is fitting into layers. Rox wants to save the world by overthrowing the evil gods, the Tenryubito, but he also wants those evildoers to get what they deserve, just like Jonah, who wanted to save the innocent, but for the wicked to burn in hell. Rox, like Jonah, rebelled against the god of his time. In this case, he rebelled against Imu, the divine figure of the world government. Jonah fled from God and embarked with some unknown sailors. Rox fled to the seas and formed a crew full of powerful pirates who were not really very loyal to him. When Jonah unleashed divine wrath, his sailors threw him overboard. When Rox caused the God Valley incident, his crew probably betrayed him, which is implied that in God Valley there were internal betrayals in the crew of, in summary, Rox D. Zebek is practically the Jonah of One Piece. And this would imply that Davy Jones, whom Rox revered, is also essentially a Jonah within the story of One Piece. So far, we have associated Davy Jones with Jonah on the side of the legend, and with Rox D. Zebek due to Rox's idolatry towards him. So I think we already have a solid basis for speculation. I find it very likely that the character of Davy Jones in One Piece has a personality and background inspired by Jonah, and that his story follows some of the patterns of Jonah's story mixed with those of Davy Jones's story from Pirates of the Caribbean that we summarized earlier. But before going completely crazy, there is one last piece of the puzzle we need to mention: the Davy Back fights. We already know that Davy Jones is somehow related to that strange pirate game introduced in the Foxy Saga, because it cannot be a coincidence that Rox D. Zebek, a worshipper of Davy Jones, formed his crew through Davy Back fights. And the narrator told us that Rox recruited members from other crews using that game. And what is the premise of a Davy Back fight? Steal members from the rival crew and force them to join yours. It is a game of submission, basically. The winning captain takes the nakama from the loser. That sounds very similar to something we have already seen Imu can do, doesn't it? Think about how Imu can literally erase entire islands from the map or subjugate people at will as if they were pieces in a game. This theme of subjugating and taking what you want is present both in Imu's powers and in the Davy Back fights. It can't be a coincidence. Now let's connect the dots. In Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy Jones didn't start as the devil. Jonah wasn't the devil either. Of course not, they were ordinary people or pirates who ended up in situations where the devil turned them to his cause. In One Piece, in the Foxy Saga, Sanji explains to us that pirates call Davy back the act of taking what you want from your enemies and, for example, snatching their companions. This game is named Davy, probably after Davy Jones. So what is the original background of a Davy Back fight? Well, I'm going to tell you what I suspect. I believe that the Davy Back fights were originally created to recover Davy. In other words, I sense that in ancient times, someone lost Davy Jones, lost his soul to a devil, and created this game to try to recover it. I have a very strong hunch here. I suspect that someone, perhaps Imu, or someone with Imu's power in the past, took Davy Jones's soul in a game or a bet. It could have literally been a gambling duel against the devil. That's why the Davy Back fights exist, to keep alive the possibility of reversing that outcome, to train and one day recover what was lost. As an interesting note, there is an American song called The Devil Went Down to Georgia, which is about a musician challenging the devil to a fiddle duel. If you have never heard it, I recommend it because it quite well describes the idea of beating the devil at his own game, very much in line with what I think Oda might be doing with this legend. The image I have is the following: Davy Jones challenged the devil of the sea to a game, a competition, a bet, and lost something more valuable than life. He lost his soul and, as a consequence, was forced to join the devil's crew. Imagine it, Davy Jones and his band facing a demonic being in a sort of legendary Davy Back fight, and Davy loses, and as punishment, he and perhaps part of his crew become enslaved by the devil. In The Legend of Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy Jones tore out his heart and kept it in a chest, thus distancing his soul from himself. In One Piece, it could be similar, but with a twist. Perhaps it was the devil who tore out Davy Jones's soul and kept it somewhere, in Davy Jones's locker. In any case, the result is the same. The pirate Davy Jones ended up becoming the demon himself. Let's remember what Robin said, a pirate from a long time ago who was cursed by a demon, and what better curse than to become what you hated the most? It could be that Davy Jones was cursed, turning him into a demon under the control of the original devil. Even the small reference by Sanji in the Foxy Saga makes me think. Sanji says that taking what you want from your enemies, pirates call it Davy Backfight. And at the end of the Foxy Saga, they say that whoever breaks the rules of that game goes to Davy Jones's locker, meaning they lose their pirate soul. It all sounds like the game is very, very tied to Davy's story, and what would happen after Davy lost his soul. Well, I imagine that his nakamas, or the people who loved him, wanted to get him back. The only way to recover your lost comrade was to play against the devil again and win. That's where the tradition of the Davy Backfights would have originated, pirates training and competing among themselves to one day be ready to challenge the devil again and recover Davy. Does it sound crazy to you? Well, think about how it fits in Pirates of the Caribbean. Davy Jones removes his heart, which is equivalent to losing his soul. He keeps it in the chest, his locker, and he himself becomes the devil of the sea. Well, in One Piece, the version would be that Davy Jones lost his soul in a game against the sea demon and ended up cursed as a demon. Davy Jones in One Piece probably challenged the Sea Devil to a game and lost, and as a consequence, he transformed into a demon, becoming just another pawn of the devil himself. Obviously, it's still an incomplete story because we're extrapolating a lot, but what a story. I hope this theory is entertaining for now and seems quite solid to you, at least as much as it does to me. At first, I asked myself the question, could Davy Jones actually have been Joy Boy? We know of two great legendary figures from the past, Joy Boy, the hero of the Void Century, and Davy Jones, this cursed pirate about whom we have some mentions, and it is logical to wonder if they could be the same. And so far, nothing I've said contradicts that possibility. It could be that Joy Boy and Davy Jones were the same person, but interpreted in different ways by history. But I'll be honest, it would seem a bit dull to leave it at that. I prefer to raise the stakes and offer you something you've never heard before. I want you to say, what the heck did I just hear? When you finish listening to this theory. So even though Davy Jones could simply be Joy Boy, I'm going to propose something even crazier for you to really have something to think about. Until now, my hypotheses have been relatively logical as far as it goes, but hold on, because now comes the truly outrageous part of the theory. Let's remember, in Pirates of the Caribbean, the story of Davy Jones is a tragic love story. Davy Jones made a pact with the woman he loved, Calypso, and ended up feeling betrayed by her. But beware, in the movies, Calypso didn't actually betray him with bad intentions. She confesses to Davy that she still loved him, but her wild and untamed nature forced her to be free, not to be tied down waiting 10 years for him. Basically, Calypso could not stop being free because freedom was her essence. Davy Jones, blinded by pain, interpreted it as an unforgivable betrayal and demonized her in his mind. But in reality, it wasn't exactly like that. There are interesting parallels here with One Piece. We could compare Calypso, that goddess of untamable freedom, with the idea of the sun god Nika, the embodiment of freedom itself. Even with Luffy himself, Calypso had a nature that could not be chained. Something like absolute freedom governed her life. And what does Luffy represent if not freedom? Calypso did not wait for Davy Jones because she could not betray herself. She could not stop being free. Davy Jones, in his pain, perceived her as an evil traitor, like the devil of the sea. But in reality, he simply did not understand her nature. In One Piece, I think we will see something similar. Davy Jones probably became enemies with someone he cared about a lot, a friend, a loved one, maybe even his own captain, because he felt that person failed him or betrayed him. But it may be that Davy was wrong, that he didn't understand the higher reason behind his friend's action. Let's go back to Jonah. It's easy to imagine that Jonah felt betrayed by God. God wanted to save the wicked people that Jonah believed unworthy of salvation. Perhaps Jonah even thought, why is God asking me for something so absurd? Is he playing with the devil by putting me in the middle of his game? Jonah might have come to believe that God himself was deceiving him or putting him on the devil's side for no apparent reason. And then Jonah, confused and angry, betrayed God by disobeying him and fleeing. I would like to think that something like that happened in the story of Davy Jones in One Piece, that Davy Jones ended up confronting someone he deeply cared for or respected because he felt that person betrayed him first. Davy Jones made an enemy of someone very important to him, someone almost divine in his life. It could be his captain, his best friend, or even his beloved, because he felt that person had betrayed him. Although in reality, he was wrong and did not understand the full picture. So I propose this. Was Davy Jones actually Joy Boy? Or perhaps was he someone from the era of Joy Boy who ate the Hito Hito no Mi, model Nika, the sun god, and was basically a parallel to Luffy? Personally, I don't think so. My theory leads me to believe he was a friend or close nakama of someone like Luffy, possibly Joy Boy himself, rather than being Joy Boy. We have to be careful with our assumptions. We've always thought, oh yes, he was a great pirate from the past. Surely he was a great captain. But what if not? Davy Jones could well have been the first mate of a crew, a member, not the leader. Maybe Davy Jones was part of Joy Boy's crew, even his right-hand man, and not the captain himself. Imagine that Davy Jones received a divine order in a way, an order from his captain, who for him was like a godly figure, especially if that captain had the fruit of the sun god Nika, who was practically a divine envoy, and Davy Jones refused to carry out that order. He fled feeling betrayed or outraged by what he had been asked. In terms of analogy, Davy Jones would be Jonah, his captain. Joy Boy would be the god or the son of God, the champion of the divine will at that time. Joy Boy with the Nika fruit and his mission to free the world would be that sun god giving orders, sometimes, that no one understands. If everything I am saying were true, that pirate in that context is literally participating in a game, a cosmic game of betting against the devil. You are fighting against the devil, and what you risk is your freedom or your soul, your dreams. Once you enter the game, you cannot back out without consequences, because even if you manage to escape with your life, if you abandon, you would have lost the most important thing in your life, your dream, your goal, which in this world is equivalent to losing your soul. The character Zoro himself makes his point of view clear. He would rather die than give up on his dreams. In fact, Eiichiro Oda himself said that Luffy does not kill his enemies because in the world of One Piece, and for Luffy himself, it is considered worse to destroy a person's dreams than to end their life. And that is what Luffy does with his enemies. And I am not just saying this metaphorically, it is explicitly in the rules of the Davy Back fights in One Piece. There are 3 articles that define the defeat in that game. Number 1, any crew member captured during the game can only be recovered by playing again. There is no rescue by brute force. It has to be within the game itself. Number 2, the captured must swear immediate loyalty to the winning captain. That is to say, your will comes to belong to the enemy. And number 3, a stolen flag can never be raised again. Losing your flag is losing your identity as a crew, and they warn that those who do not obey these rules will end up in Davy Jones's locker as a wretch. Translated, the one who breaks the rules loses their pirate soul and becomes cursed. It's not that they die instantly or anything, but it's worse. They are an outcast whose existence no longer has honor or purpose. A lost soul, metaphorically dead in life. It sounds like going to Davy Jones's locker is like condemning yourself to that purgatory we talked about. So what do I think happened to Davy Jones? That he didn't play by the rules. I believe that Davy Jones, after arguing with his captain Joy Boy, or whoever his divine friend was, abandoned the crew in the middle of that game against the devil they had going on. He broke the most sacred rules of pirate camaraderie, and that's why he suffered a fate worse than death. And here comes the craziest part of this theory, so get ready. I have a crazy idea about the identity of Davy Jones that surprisingly fits. What if Davy Jones actually parallels Usopp? Yes, you heard right. Our Usopp, the sniper of the Straw Hats. Before you say, what? Let me explain the parallel calmly, because I know at first it may sound absurd, but it fits incredibly well. Let's go back for a moment to the Water 7 saga. Think about Usopp's story during Water 7 and Enies lobby, and compare it with Jonah's. Usopp received an order from his captain, Luffy, who happens to be the bearer of the power of the sun god Nika, future king of the pirates. And basically, Luffy is the divine figure at sea in the current era. That order was to abandon his dear friend, the ship Going Merry, which was unfortunately destined to die, to stop functioning. After all it had endured, and he decided they should let the Mary go, give it a proper funeral, and get a new ship. Usopp did not understand or accept that order. It hurt him deeply. He was furious, afraid to let go of the ship that represented the crew's friendship. He thought Luffy was wrong, that he was betraying the Mary. What did Usopp do? He challenged his captain. He had a serious fight with Luffy, even left the crew and ran away, separated from them. This is the equivalent of Jonah saying no to God and escaping on a ship. Usopp, angry and hurt, went off on his own. In that fight in Water 7, Usopp ended up saying very harsh things to Luffy, implying that Luffy was irresponsible, a fool for discarding the Mary, almost calling him a coward or heartless, similar to how the people of Wano called Oden a fool for not fighting. Usopp was so blinded by anger and fear that he practically treated Luffy as if he were the villain, the devil in that situation. Remember a brutal phrase from Usopp during his duel with Luffy: "Go ahead, try to kill me. I will beat you at your own game. I have already figured out how to take you down." At that moment, Usopp, our favorite liar, was taking on the role of challenger, as if Luffy were the enemy to defeat, all because he couldn't stand the decision his captain had made. And what happened? Usopp lost that fight because no matter how brave he was standing up to Luffy, we all knew deep down that he couldn't win, especially not against his captain. Luffy defeated him, and notice, Luffy didn't finish him off or anything, he just let him go. After the fight, Usopp was completely alone. He decided not to return to the crew out of wounded pride. That Usopp we knew metaphorically died of shame and pain, and in his place, Sogeking was born as he put on a mask and pretended to be someone else. This is analogous to Jonah sinking into the sea and being swallowed by the whale. Usopp fell into a hole of loneliness and despair, a personal purgatory where he was neither with his friends nor following his dreams. He was on standby with a false identity, licking his wounds. He was neither alive nor dead in terms of his dream of being a pirate. During that time, Usopp reflected and thought about what he really wanted, about what he had done wrong. He gradually realized that his fear and wounded pride had led him to act that way. And just like Jonah prayed and repented in the belly of the whale, Usopp finally accepted in his heart that Luffy was right. The Going Merry had completed its cycle, and it was right to let it go with dignity. So Jonah ended up obeying God and went to the Wicked City to fulfill his mission. He helped Luffy rescue Robin at Enies Lobby. He traveled to the Wicked City of Justice with his god Luffy by his side to save someone many considered an evil person, Nico Robin, who was accused of being a demon by the world government. And after that adventure, Usopp finally let go of the Mary in peace. He cried, apologized to the ship and his companions for his attitude, and also asked to forgive Luffy for having doubted him. Jonas betrayed God, but then repented. Usopp betrayed Luffy, but then asked for forgiveness and rejoined the group. There's even a brilliant final detail. We all know that Usopp's lies tend to come true. It's almost a running joke in One Piece. Usopp, in a way, is a liar whose unintended prophecies end up happening. And who was Jonah in the Bible? A prophet, a somewhat rebellious one, yes, but a prophet nonetheless. In Water 7, Usopp told a big lie by pretending to be Sogeking, and that lie ended up becoming partly true. He became a hero for an entire island. Usopp has always had that aura of the liar who unintentionally tells the truth. Usopp is literally a prophet, just like Jonah was. Do you see where I'm going? For a theory that relies more on interpretations than concrete data, this is quite solid and consistent. Oda often takes mythological or historical inspirations and creatively remixes them. And I think we have identified a very strong pattern here. Usopp's story in Water 7 is an almost exact mirror of Jonah's story. Too many coincidences to ignore. It is very possible that in the story of the Greater Past, the Void Century, or others, something similar happened with Joy Boy, the Luffy of the past. And then, if Oda already narrated that dynamic in a microcosm with Usopp and Luffy, it is very possible that the story of the Greater Past, the Void Century, or even before, something similar happened with Joy Boy, who would be the Luffy of the past, and also with Davy Jones, who would be the Usopp of the past. Notice Water 7. Usopp was not the captain, he was a crew member. In Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy Jones was originally also a crew member serving the goddess Calypso. He was not always his own boss at the beginning. Jonah obviously was a simple man in the service of God. Everything points to Davy Jones in One Piece probably not being the legendary captain of Joy Boy, but his nakama, his friend, his follower, who lost faith in him at a critical moment. And there are more clues within One Piece that reinforce that idea. Do you remember Loki from Elbaf and the recent story? Loki is that giant prince who, according to Big Mom, was going to marry Lola, but the important thing is his relationship with Rox. Loki is devoted to Rox D. Zebek. Well, during the Elbaf arc, Loki offers Luffy a deal and basically says, "If you help me free myself, I will grant you what you desire most." Loki presents himself almost like a tempting devil, promising to fulfill the hero's wish in exchange for freedom. Obviously, Luffy ignores the deal, but what does Loki behaving like this make us think of? A lying demon, the devil offering a pact, and in fact, the character of Loki in Norse mythology is the quintessential trickster god. It turns out that Loki has something in common with Usopp, and that is that both are great liars. Usopp is the god Usopp of creative lying, and Loki is an expert at lying. It could even be argued that Rox D. Zebek was also a liar, or at least someone who hid his true intentions. There is a certain air of dishonesty in his character that we still do not understand. Was he really the monster they portray, or did he have a hidden good side? Did he deceive his crew or his enemies? Blackbeard, whom we could see as the heir to Rox's legacy, is also extremely deceitful. He has betrayed practically everyone, has multiple personalities according to some, and seems like a pattern. The disciples of the legacy of Davy Jones, Rox, Blackbeard, Loki, share the characteristic of using lies as a tool. And Usopp, our Jonah avatar, is the benevolent liar. Let's recap this hypothetically reconstructed story of Davy Jones in One Piece by combining everything discussed. Davy Jones was a crew member of a great character. Let's call him Joy Boy to simplify it. A character parallel to Luffy in the ancient era could be the Joy Boy of the Void Century, or even earlier, if we consider that history is cyclical and that there have been several worlds. But to avoid confusion, let's say that Davy Jones sailed with Joy Boy about 800-900 years ago. Joy Boy, that ancient Luffy, and Davy Jones had a very strong disagreement. Joy Boy asked Davy Jones to do something that Davy considered wrong or intolerable. Maybe Joy Boy decided not to fight against a certain evil enemy at a given moment, for reasons only he understood, and Davy Jones interpreted it as cowardice or betrayal. This could reflect Oven's decision not to fight against Kaido at the beginning. Decisions that others did not understand and were judged poorly. Let's give a hypothetical example. Suppose Joy Boy encountered an incarnation of evil. Let's call it a Sea Devil, perhaps the predecessor of Emu. And for whatever reason, Joy Boy decided not to fight him directly at that moment. Perhaps Joy Boy saw that he could not win at that instant without catastrophic consequences. Or maybe he trusted in a long-term plan. Davy Jones, seeing his captain yield or not act against that great evil, would become enraged. For Davy Jones, who was possibly brave but fearful of losing his purpose, that would be unforgivable. Davy might have thought, why, if we have the power of the Sun God on our side, don't we destroy that evil once and for all? Why does Joy Boy hold back? Is he afraid? Is he betraying us? Davy Jones decides that if Joy Boy, his captain, is not going to defeat the devil, then he will do it himself. He abandons Joy Boy's crew, literally throws himself overboard from their shared destiny, separates, and sets out on his own to hunt the devil. This would be the echo of Usopp leaving Luffy behind to fight alone for the Merry, or of Jonah fleeing to avoid fulfilling the mission he disagreed with. Now, Davy finds himself alone but determined. He recruits a massive crew of perhaps 10,000 men. Does the number sound familiar? Usopp always fantasized about having 8,000 followers. In Dressrosa, he ended up leading thousands unintentionally, and out of nowhere became the leader of hundreds of criminals. Davy Jones, in a Usopp buggy godlike manner, could have gathered an army of pirates by promising them immense gold with his lying tongue. He probably told them exaggerated stories, mixing truths and lies, presenting himself as a messiah who would bring true freedom. All of this by defeating the demon that Joy Boy or others did not dare to face. In other words, Davy Jones became a sort of false god to his followers. For his crew, Davy was the great figure to worship. Let's remember that Rox worshipped Davy Jones, which implies that Davy Jones cultivated something like a cult of personality. Important difference. Joy Boy's crew followed Joy Boy for his camaraderie, for shared ideals, but none worshipped him as a god. Each had their own dreams, just like the Straw Hats with Luffy. In contrast, Davy Jones's crew probably idolized him fanatically, as if he were infallible. This is similar to what happens with Buggy in the current story. His men see him as almost divine due to misunderstandings and coincidences. Davy Jones might have been like that, a great fraud with accidental charisma who surrounded himself with pirates who acclaimed him without knowing that in reality, he was not as strong as the legend said. With this great army, Davy Jones is going to confront the devil in person. And here I imagine an epic scene, Davy Jones challenging the devil of the sea, whether it's Imu or the possessor of Imu's power at that moment, to an all or nothing game, possibly wagering his own soul. A Davy backfight on an exaggerated level, but here is the supreme irony. Davy Jones, despite his entourage of 10,000 men, turns out to be a fraud in terms of real power compared to the devil. His followers gradually realize that their leader is not that invincible warrior they believed, and when they see that the duel is lost, they betray and abandon him. Imagine thousands of pirates deserting or turning their backs on him at the crucial moment. Just like Rox's crew apparently abandoned him at God Valley, Davy Jones is left completely alone facing the devil and feels an overwhelming terror for the first time. Davy Jones panics. The great taboo for a pirate is to turn his back in the final battle, but Davy can't help it. He tries to flee, break the duel, cheat to save his life, and that desperate act breaks the rules of the sacred game he had started. That's where the curse comes in. Cheating or fleeing in the game against the devil, Davy Jones automatically loses what he wagered, his soul, to Davy Jones's locker, which ironically bears his name. The devil captures his soul, his essence, and Davy Jones receives a curse. That curse is, as we said, being turned into an immortal demon in the service of the devil. The devil basically says to him, "You wanted to be a fearless warrior? Very well, I grant you your wish in my own way." And Davy Jones transforms into a demonic, immortal, powerful being, literally heartless, incapable of love or fear, because he no longer has anything to protect. He lost everything. His crew, his friends, his very soul. Davy Jones wanted to feel no fear. He wanted to be strong. Now, as a demon, he feels no fear because he also feels no love or attachments. Paradoxically, he became what he always wanted to be, a warrior invulnerable to fear, but at the cost of losing everything that made him human. I must say that the image of Davy Jones transforming into a demon fits perfectly with what Robin said, cursed by a demon, and with what we saw in Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy tearing out his heart and becoming a monster. It also reminds me of what happened to Doribroggi in the mythology of Elbaf within One Piece, and it's that they said they turned into demons because they fought eternally, although that was more of a sailor's rumor. Even in Elbaf, where we have seen the Sacred Knights, they could be cursed people turned into immortal demons, and the truth is that it really seems that way. The thing is, being a demon is contagious in a certain way. A demon can create more demons because it corrupts others. Davy Jones, already transformed into the Devil's Champion, could have had the power to turn his most loyal followers into demonic creatures as well, spreading the curse. Maybe that's where the first devilfish or other strange races came from. Now let's return to Joy Boy, the friendly captain that Davy left. Joy Boy eventually finds out what happened. His former Nakama, Davy Jones, has been cursed, turned into a demon, and is wreaking havoc under the Devil's orders. Joy Boy, true to his principles, wants to save his friend even though his friend has betrayed him. Joy Boy has two options. One, kill Davy Jones, end the demon, and two, try to recover Davy Jones's soul from the Devil's locker. Killing him would be terribly difficult emotionally because Davy Jones was his friend, his Nakama. Think about Luffy. Do you think Luffy could kill Usopp even if Usopp turned evil? It would be devastating, so it is assumed that Joy Boy prefers to use option B, rescuing Davy Jones's soul. And how do you recover a lost Nakama? Exactly, by playing again according to the rules. You have to re-enter the game against the devil and win this time. This is precisely one of the rules of the Davy backfights. The only way to recover a lost comrade is to play and win. So I imagine that Joy Boy, far from giving up, decides that even though he cannot now, at some point he will challenge the devil in his game again to save Davy Jones. And I think that intention is so significant that it almost becomes a promise that transcends time. Here is a metaphorical element in One Piece. Dreams are equivalent to the soul. Recovering our dreams from the devil is a recurring theme. For example, in Thriller Bark with the Stolen Shadows, or in Whole Cake with Big Mom stealing lifetime in exchange for security. Luffy, during Whole Cake Island, decides not to fight Big Mom head on because his priority is to properly get Sanji back, to wait, to trust that his Nakama is ready to return. In the same way, Joy Boy might choose a long-term plan to recover Davy Jones without sacrificing him. Now let's imagine that everything we are talking about happened in the Void Century 900 years ago. We know that somehow Joy Boy failed in his original mission as he left an apology message on the Poneglyphs. I am inclined to think that Joy Boy did not manage to save Davy Jones at that time. He might have tried, but the circumstances did not allow it. In fact, Joy Boy might have had to choose between defeating the devil, Imu, or saving Davy Jones. And as we speculated before, perhaps defeating the devil by brute force would not return Davy's soul. On the contrary, it could destroy it forever. Like with Mariah, if you kill the one who has the shadows might not return. Joy Boy, facing that impossible situation, might have thought, if I kill Imu now, I may never recover my friend's soul. But if I leave Imu alive, my friend remains cursed and the world is in danger. What do I do? A very tragic choice, but what do we know about Joy Boy? That he never gave up on his dream, and that in the face of failure, he decided to pass on his will to the future. I think Joy Boy chose an unexpected option. He defeated Davy Jones, incapacitated him without killing him, and hid him. Yes, similar to what Shanks did with Loki, whom we know he defeated but did not kill. Instead, he imprisoned him. And I imagine Joy Boy facing Davy Jones, an emotional duel like Luffy versus Usopp. Joy Boy defeats Davy Jones in combat, but he doesn't have the heart to kill him. Instead, he locks him away in some secret and safe place where Imu, the devil, cannot easily find him. Maybe he seals him in some place in the deep sea or inside some structure, perhaps in Laugh Tale itself or in the secret sea beneath the Reverse Mountain. Let's speculate. He might have locked him in an inaccessible place, trusting that in the future someone worthy will find him and be able to free him in the right way. Joy Boy, having to do this and not being able to truly free his friend, feels that he has failed his dream. Remember the phrase, the day Joy Boy could not save someone was the day Joy Boy could no longer fulfill his dream. That's why Joy Boy wrote the letter of apology on the poneglyph of the island, because he couldn't completely free the world, he couldn't save all his friends. Joy Boy then leaves his treasure behind, and what is Joy Boy's most precious treasure? Probably his crew, his friends, and among them, Davy Jones was very special, so it is very possible that part of the One Piece treasure is, in fact, Davy Jones himself, or something related to him. Then we arrive at the present, the third world, the era of Luffy. Luffy, as the heir to Joy Boy's will not only defeat the devil Imu, but his final mission will also be to save him. How so? Well, you see, now we will delve into an even more philosophical aspect of the theory. One Piece, the story, at its core, is not simply about the good defeating the bad. It has increasingly taken shape as a story about breaking the cycle of hatred and saving the world completely without leaving loose ends of resentment. And it is possible that this means that, in the end, Luffy not only defeats Imu, the devil, but also saves him from his hatred and loneliness. Jonah in the Bible had much in common with Lucifer, yes, the fallen angel. Jonah was a servant of God who rebelled, and Lucifer was an angel of God who rebelled out of pride. In a way, Jonah and, by extension, Davy Jones, represent that rebel who, out of pride and misunderstanding, became an adversary of God. Lucifer, according to tradition, was filled with pride and wanted to be above God, which fits with the ambition of certain characters, perhaps Imu himself, who is literally above the world in Mary Geoise and with a divine complex. The story of One Piece, in my opinion, is about achieving the impossible, and what could be more impossible than creating a world where everyone can achieve their dreams and no one suffers? It sounds utopian and unattainable. Many villains in One Piece, Crocodile, Doflamingo, Kaido, have that cynical view that achieving a just world is impossible. Even characters like Akainu believe that only through strict control can peace be maintained, sacrificing individual dreams. But Oda has been showing us that the way to win is not by playing by the same rules of evil. It is not. The strongest imposes their justice, like Akainu, but it is something different. Luffy represents that difference. Luffy gains friends instead of subjugating them and inspires instead of frightening. So, going back to the metaphor of God against the devil, you can't beat the devil at his own game, because if you do, you become the same as Pirates of the Caribbean taught. Each side that took power became the new tyrant. Luffy cannot become the kind of person who imposes his dream by killing those who oppose him, because then he stops being Luffy. That's why I believe the ultimate goal is not to defeat the devil Imu by destroying him, but to save him. But what does it mean to save the devil? Well, to redeem the adversary, to convince the enemy that they were wrong and bring them out of their darkness. Think about this. Oda often redeems evil characters or gives them nuances. An example would be the racist fishmen who changed thanks to Otohime. Perhaps Imu cannot be redeemed 100%, but his champion, Davy Jones, might be. And if you manage to save the Devil's champion, that is, bring Davy Jones back to humanity, you would be showing the Devil himself that his cause was wrong. Ultimately, this story might be about how everyone deserves to be saved, even those who have fallen into darkness. Luffy has never killed his enemies. He breaks their will, makes them see their mistakes through sheer force, but he makes them reconsider to some extent. And to defeat the Devil of One Piece, Emu, Luffy will probably need everyone's help. No one can do it alone, not even God. One Piece has always been about friendship, cooperation, and perhaps the great irony is that the way to defeat Emu is not by giving him a punch stronger than the one Joy Boy gave him 800 years ago, but by convincing him of something. What could that something be? Well, it could precisely be showing him that his dream can also be fulfilled in a way. Do it correctly. If Emu is indeed that Usopp from the first world we speculated about, an ancient enemy betrayed who wants to undo the world out of pain, then perhaps Emu also has a deep dream of recovering something lost, and could be the one to make the Devil laugh. That is, break M's wall of hatred, making him see the light. Yes, it sounds cheesy, but it fits with the recurring idea of inherited will, and we will meet again and the dawn will come. In concrete terms, I think Luffy and his allies will end up confronting Emu and his Shadow Army in the end, and in that climax it is very possible that Davy Jones himself will appear. Emu might try to use Davy Jones, if somehow recaptured, as a false deity to deceive the world or to fight. Perhaps Emu has been keeping the legend of Davy Jones alive as a destructive god in which part of the world believes. And all this would be to manipulate the masses. Remember in the buff, the doubt there was about Nika, whether he was a god of laughter, a warrior god, or what. Perhaps Emu has promoted the worship of a vengeful sun god, who is actually Davy Jones, to counter the worship of the liberating sun god, the ancient Joy Boy or Nika, but Emu has the hat, not the man. This suggests that Davy Jones is currently beyond Emu's reach. Where? It could be in Laugh Tale itself. Imagine that the final treasure includes freeing an ancient prisoner, Davy Jones, and learning the truth. I think that Joy Boy might have left Davy Jones safeguarded on the final island, Laugh Tale, which is literally a tale of laughter. Roger laughed upon discovering the story, so maybe they saw that the whole cycle was very ironic. Perhaps they laughed upon understanding that Laugh Tale literally involved making someone who hasn't laughed in centuries laugh, the very demon Davy Jones, or Emu himself. Roger and his crew arrived too early. They couldn't do anything about it. They just laughed, took note, and left. That's why Roger called that place the Story of Laughter, because there's a cosmic plan to provoke the most impossible laughter, that of the Devil. I'm speculating a mile a minute, I know, but let me finish the thread. What is Luffy's dream? We know that Luffy has told his Nakamas his hidden dream, and that they all reacted with surprise and smiles. Ace and Sabo heard it as children and laughed. Oda hides that dream from us. My guess is that Luffy's dream is something seemingly silly but immense, like, I want everyone to be free and have fun together in a big worldwide party, something like going around the world with everyone as friends. I don't know, but I've seen popular theories that his dream is to throw the biggest party in history where everyone laughs. I would express it like this: Luffy's dream is to make even the most bitter enemy laugh. Maybe as a child he saw Ace and Sabo so serious and competitive that he said, I will make everyone laugh with something no one imagines. That dream would be passed from Joy Boy to Roger to Luffy. Joy Boy did not kill the enemy because his childhood dream was, one day I will make this enemy, the Devil, truly smile with us. It sounds crazy, yes. It's ridiculous, yes. So ridiculous that it fits with Roger's laughter upon reaching the end. Joy Boy perhaps, instead of killing Emu, wanted to redeem him, and that's why he couldn't fulfill his normal war mission. Roger laughed because he understood the magnitude of Joy Boy's plan. Did this guy really want to do this? How crazy, or what an innocent child. He called it Laugh Tale because of that story destined for a laugh. Then, in the final battle, Luffy will surely release Davy Jones. It could even happen earlier to turn the tables against Emu. Maybe Blackbeard, in his quest for power, will reach the cell first and release Davy Jones, hoping to use him for his own ends. Blackbeard might be the one to release Davy Jones, believing he will gain a demonic ally or simply to cause chaos. Or perhaps Luffy will release him, understanding that it is the right thing to do, even knowing it is danger. Imagine the situation. Someone says, don't release him, Luffy. That guy will destroy the world if you do. And Luffy replying something like, chaining someone forever. I don't like that at all. If he's really that bad, then I'll see how to defeat him later, but I don't plan to leave anyone locked up just out of fear, because Luffy believes in absolute freedom. He did it with Boa Hancock, whom he didn't hand over, with Law, who broke the Shichibukai system, with the prisoners of Impel Down. He always frees people, even if they can be dangerous, because he trusts in facing the consequences. So Luffy would free Davy Jones just like with Loki, who was also chained, and he would do it without hesitation for the simple principle of, if he really is that troublesome, then I'll deal with him when the time comes. That is Luffy's mentality. Once free, Davy Jones would probably still be under the demonic curse, resentful. He could be a great temporary antagonist, a former hero turned into a destructive demon, maybe Davy Jones, the demon and Blackbeard ally out of convenience, or Imu controls him mentally from a distance, who knows. The final battle could be chaos with multiple fronts. Luffy allies against Imu and his forces, against Blackbeard, and in the middle, Demon Davy Jones wreaking havoc. But the key to winning, as we have said, will not only be hitting harder, but breaking the cycle. How is it broken? By connecting with the enemy on a human level. Joy Boy in the past couldn't kill his treasure. Luffy couldn't kill Usopp if he were possessed either. He would try to save him. Something like that would surely happen. Maybe the current Usopp has to face his own ultimate fear and play a critical role. Many believe that Usopp could temporarily die fulfilling his lie. He said in Thriller Bark, "I died, and you know." And in Pirates of the Caribbean, to free Davy Jones in the end, what they do is kill him. Maybe in One Piece, Usopp would have a sacrificial moment, meaning he doesn't really die, but he dies for a while. It could be that to break Davy Jones's curse, someone has to offer their life or something symbolic. It would be very powerful if Usopp were the one to voluntarily sacrifice his life so that Luffy can reach Emu or to save someone else. It would be the culmination of his dream to be the bravest. Imagine Usopp sacrificing himself, proving to Davy Jones, the great original lying demon, that the gods, Luffy in this case, truly value their friends to the death. Or to Imu, that first Usopp shows that true friendship exists. I'm going off on future tangents, so I'm returning to the overall structure. Luffy in the end is going to achieve what Joy Boy could not, recover the soul of Davy Jones. This would surely mean also destroying all the devil fruits, freeing all those trapped souls, and possibly destroying the eternal flame that caused all the imbalance, which would be like the source of energy or magic that corrupted the natural cycle, perhaps an artifact hidden in the planet's core, the famous Forbidden Sun mentioned in ancient texts. That is, what could be the Mother Flame, but from the Void Century. Remember, a theory within the same story speculates that the current world is built on another, and that the Red Line is like the keel that keeps the world afloat, separated from the underworld. If the Red Line is recklessly destroyed, it would be a cataclysm that would unite the seas, which would be good, but it could sink the world, which would be bad. Many good characters want to destroy the Red Line, Shoji, the Giants, and all this is to unite the world and fulfill the prophecy of the All Blue. It's like a narrative mandate that it must be destroyed. But here the theory also proposes, what if the Red Line is also what keeps Hell sealed below? If Imu precisely wants to destroy the Red Line, it might not be to unite the world fraternally, but to sink everything into hell. Maybe Imu believes that by returning everything to the Red Sea, they will reunite with their deceased loved ones or something like that. It would be a great twist if Imu, whom we all believe to be a defender of the status quo, actually wants to destroy the current world for something personal. Then Luffy would have to make difficult decisions. Destroy the Red Line to fulfill everyone's dream? Have a unified sea? But if he destroys it, he would unleash the infernal chaos below. He might handle it. But the story of One Piece is about taking those risks for dreams, entering the belly of the whale that is facing that enormous challenge even if it might destroy you. Luffy is not afraid of that leap of faith. He will bring the dawn and tear down the Red Line, I am almost sure, because it is necessary for the era of unification. Maybe that will be the final battle. Luffy against Imu, literally at the center of the world, in the hell of the Red Sea, with the eternal flame burning there. Perhaps Imu wants to use Pluton or something to break the last barrier. The base of the Red Line, let's imagine. And Luffy decides that he will do it his way, and in the end, by destroying that eternal flame, all the devil fruits in the world stop working, and release the accumulated souls. This would be a crazy ending where suddenly all the users lose their powers because Luffy freed the souls from before, returning humanity to its natural state. It could be that Davy Jones, the demon, regains his humanity at that moment when his soul returns. Imagine that scene. Luffy manages to destroy the source. Demon Davy Jones staggers, a light comes out of his chest, and finally his soul or heart returns. He becomes himself again after centuries. And there, maybe Luffy or someone else must sacrifice themselves to stop Imu. But by then, Davy Jones would be free from the curse. Ultimately, Luffy would have fulfilled Joy Boy's dream, saving both his friends, Sanji, Robin, and so on, as he did during his journey, and even the lost friend from the past, Davy Jones, and even the original enemy in a certain sense. The "all the broken pieces will become one" could refer to all wills and souls finally resting together. Those from the first world, second world, and third would reunite. There might even be reunions of spirits. The shadow of Joy Boy greeting the soul of his old friend David. It would be an emotional ending. I know all this sounds huge, maybe it's too convoluted, but hey, it's One Piece. It's huge and convoluted if you think about it. And to me at least, this story seems worthy of One Piece, with all its epic scale, its laughter, its philosophical twists, and its heart. I have unleashed a barrage of theories one after another, and I understand if some parts seem too much to digest. Oda will obviously have to package all this simply for the general audience when the end comes, but I think the central message would be something like, it's not just about defeating evil, but about breaking the cycle of hatred, saving even those who seemed irredeemable, fulfilling everyone's dreams, not just a few. This would be the One Piece in a conceptual sense, the total unity of everyone laughing under the same free sky. To summarize a bit, I conceive the One Piece literally as everything. That is, the collection of all good things, the dreams of each character, complete freedom, shared joy, the unified history. All of that is the One Piece. But within the story, what matters is what the One Piece means to Luffy, because that is the interpretation that will count in the end. If for Luffy, One Piece is traveling around the world in an eternal banquet with all his friends and rivals, then that is what it will be. And that absurd dream is inherited. Many have had it. Roger, Joy Boy. I firmly believe that Luffy's dream is to make every being in the world laugh, even his enemies, whether at a party or an unprecedented event. A dream so childlike and innocent that Ace and Sabo laughed upon hearing it, that the Straw Hats reacted with surprise but understood it, and that Roger himself surely shared, because otherwise he wouldn't have laughed upon reaching Laugh Tale. Maybe he gave a message from Joy Boy like, I hope you can make everyone laugh someday, even that grumpy king of the world. Roger called the last point Laugh Tale because he understood that everything revolved around a final laugh, the hardest laugh to achieve. And going back to Davy Jones, just to wrap up, I think it is very likely that Davy Jones, the historical character from One Piece, will appear in some way in the final plot. He will surely be released by Blackbeard, Luffy, or one of these two, and will play a very important role, either as a tremendous danger or as an unexpected ally. But definitely, I bet that Davy Jones will be freed from his curse in the end. Maybe Luffy will free him, or perhaps it will be Blackbeard trying to use him and Luffy will free him from control. Luffy believes in freedom, so seeing someone chained against their own will, whether it's Davy Jones or even Loki, whom he just freed, he won't like it at all. Even if they say to him, don't do it because it will destroy the world, Luffy would think, if it really is that bad, when he is free and wants to do evil, I will stop him myself, but I will not leave him chained out of fear. That is the essence of Luffy, and I bet Oda will make that decision of faith by Luffy the right one, because in the end, Luffy will find a way to stop any threat without sacrificing his principles. Possibly Luffy will need the help of many to achieve all this. Maybe Brook's music and the crew wanted to make the rest laugh. Perhaps Shanks and others will participate in the final battle against Blackbeard. We have mentioned many elements. Maybe Laugh Tale is inside a colossal sleeping whale. Imagine, there are theories that the final island could be a living being. Blackbeard might become obsessed with hunting that whale, while Luffy, on the other hand, would conquer it with laughter and music, with Binks' sake to open the route perhaps? Everything fits thematically. Although there are several things I've said that may not happen exactly as stated, I honestly believe that if Oda were to tell us something along these lines, it would be a story worthy of One Piece, full of adventure, mythology, excitement, strength, humor, and wit. Whether you agree with parts, none, or all of what I've shared here, I hope you at least found the theory interesting. One Piece has accustomed us to speculate on a grand scale, and I think this crazy theory fits well with that. For my part, I have had a lot of fun connecting these points and delving into the more philosophical angle of Davy Jones' fate and the essence of One Piece. In conclusion, my summarized version would be that Davy Jones was in Joy Boy's bed, fell into disgrace, and Joy Boy left his rescue pending. Luffy and his friends will be the ones to finally rescue him and everyone, even the world itself and the devil, thus completing the dream inherited for centuries. Does it sound crazy? Of course it does. But if any story can take us on such a wild path and then make it feel logical and emotional, that story is One Piece. In any case, this is the theory. Whether you agree with everything or maybe just some things that might seem too much, I hope you found it entertaining and that it made you think about new possibilities. One Piece is an amazing adventure, and I think if it ends like this, it would be a fitting conclusion, and that would be the 5 theories about the Davy Clan in One Piece. Surely with the last theory, there might have been some small errors or minor conditions or something like that, because it's a theory I recorded just before the revelation of the Davy Clan, but I am indeed talking about Davy Jones as the mythology. That is to say, I don't mention the Davy Clan, but I think it's a bit irrelevant because just as Davy Jones is treated as a character, I think it still makes quite a bit of sense. I say this because I already know that in the comments you are telling me, no, but it turns out that Rox was a descendant of Davy Jones. Yes, I know, but I thought it was important to bring you this theory because really the analysis it has of the whole legend and all the folklore of Davy Jones in the real world and piracy is incredible, so I think it was necessary to bring it as the 5th and final theory. As I say, this is where the video would end. Let me know in the comments which of these 5 theories was your favorite. If you have an extra one, leave it in the comments, and also let me know in the comments who you think Davy Jones is, if you think he has a secret identity, or if you think he has any important secret to mention. Leave it all in the comments. Remember that if you liked the video, you can give it a big like. Subscribe to the channel to see more videos. A huge greeting and see you in the next video.